The Cliffs. Fazbear's Frights, number 7. 5 Nights at Freddy's. Tyler knocked on the sippy cup off the kitchen table again. Careful, buddy, Robert said, picking it up and setting it in front of his son. Robert tried to feel relieved the already well-worn copy of How to Handle Your Toddlerly Years, which he jokingly called the owner's manual, assured him that it was perfectly normal for toddlers to knock over cups, throw food, and demonstrate how often overwhelming amount of emotional instability and was because of the normal didn't mean it was easy. Play phone? Tyler said, eyeing Robert's phone on the table. Robert out set a bowl of cereal and bananas in front of Tyler. It's not time for you to play with Daddy's phone. It's time for you to eat your breakfast and get ready for daycare. Tyler, distracted by his bowl of Cheerios, sliced banana, and sippy cup of milk, began happily eating. That's another thing about 2-year-olds, Robert thought. Their emotions can turn on a dime. When Robert had last taken Tyler to the pediatrician, he had unloaded on her about Tyler's wild mood swings. The pediatrician just laughed and said, "Welcome to parenthood." He just promised him, as he always did, the task of parenting would be easier as Tyler got older. But when would it get easier? When Tyler was 3? When he was old enough to start school? When he was in college? Robert knew that for him, the hardest thing about parenting was that something had to do alone. He had never planned to be a single parent, but he had no choice now that Anna was gone. Robert never met Anna in junior year of college. He had never met Anna in junior year of college. He had never believed that finding the one theory of romance. Surely there was just one person in the whole world that was right for you, and yet his and Anna's connection was immediate. They loved the same books and movies, and they started having more serious conversations. They discovered that they shared deeper values too, that they dated through the rest of college and got engaged after graduation, agreeing on a 1-year engagement to give them some time to get used to being real grown-ups at real jobs before they got married. Robert settled into a steady but not terribly exciting job at a local lifestyle magazine, and Anna got a position as a first-grade teacher. They got married barefoot on the beach, and both set of their parents chipped in to help them with the down payment on the house. Their little bungalow had seen better days, but it still had plenty of charm, especially for young, energetic first-time homeowners who were willing to put some elbow grease into renovating it. The only downside, as far as Robert was concerned, was the house location, right next to the town's most notorious geographical feature, the cliffs. Although these rocky outcroppings possessed the rugged beauty, they also had a grisly history. The highest of them was nicknamed Jumper's Cliff by the locals because it was a common sight for suicides over the generations. It seemed that everyone knew that someone who had chosen to end it all on the cliffs, the jilted high school homecoming queen from Robert's mother's generations, the businessman who lost all his money due to bad investments, the grandmother with terminal cancer diagnosis. There were stories about the cliffs that were fact, and stories that were fiction. But true or not, these tales had made people look at the geological features with a mixture of fear and awe. Especially Jumper's Cliff teenagers gathered there and creeped each other out with scary stories. Younger kids whispered that the ghosts of departed still haunted the place where they had chosen to make the final leap. Robert had grown up hearing those stories, and the cliffs creeped him out. Anna insisted that until the suicides themselves were sad, the cliffs were just rocks. They didn't actually mean anything. Besides, the house's proximity to the cliffs is why it's been such a deal. Attributing many dark meaning to the cliffs was nothing sort of superstition. Robert knew that she was right, but once they moved into the house, she was so happy that his new wife and his new life that he hardly thought about the cliffs at all. When he looked back on it, the first year of their marriage was a blissful blur of love and laughter. In his mind, he could play out the scenes of the first year like a montage in a romantic movie. The two of them riding bikes together, cooking dinner together, cuddling in front of the TV, big bowl of popcorn between them. Sure, one of them would sometimes have a bad day at work and come down with a cold, but these problems were minuscule compared to the happiness that they had in each other's company. Although the first year of their marriage had been great, the happiest time in Robert's life had come when Anna was pregnant with Tyler. They had been married 2 years, and they found out she was pregnant, and they were both over the moon with delight. There was something about the idea of the created new human being just because of their love. It seemed almost magical. As happy as they'd been a couple, they knew they would be a happier family. Throughout Anna's pregnancy, she had glowed like some kind of ancient mother goddess from a mythology. Robert had glowed too. He was so full of love that she didn't know what to do with all of it. He massaged Anna's feet when they were sore after she got home from teaching all day. She went out to fetch her mint chocolate chip cookie ice cream when she said it was the only thing in life that would constantly satisfy her cravings. They were in perfect harmony during the pregnancy. Two dedicated gardeners growing their baby together. But then things went wrong. 2 months before the baby was due, Anna started complaining of swelling in her hands and feet. When she called the nurse to obstetrician's office, she said that was not to worry about it, and the swelling was common among pregnant women, especially the hottest months of the summer. Reassured, Anna had bought bigger shoes and soaked her feet in Epsom salts, and otherwise ignored her symptoms. But that's when she went on a regular checkup. Her blood pressure was alarmingly high, and the doctor insisted that she be admitted to a hospital immediately. After that, things were nightmarish, blur in Robert's mind. All the IV drugs the doctor gave her and the failed attempt to bring her blood pressure down, the decision to deliver the baby early by cesarean section or C-section in hopes of saving her life. The massive stroke suffered in the operating table left Robert a single father. For a long time, he was numb. None of it even felt real. Since Tyler was born early, he was tiny and unable to breathe on his own without exhausting himself. He had to stay in the hospital for a few weeks until he gained the weight and his lungs developed more. In a shocked daze, Robert would visit a new baby in the neonatal intensive care unit. He would scrub his hands and put on his face mask before entering the brightly lit white room lined with plastic incubators in which possibly tiny babies lay. Robert would stand in his own son's incubator and look at Tyler's small, skinny body, wearing a diaper the size of a fast food napkin. The parents and other babies in the NICU always looked tired and worried about like Robert did, and they arrived in couples, so at least they had each other. In horror, Robert would look at his son and think, "Kid, I'm all you have in this world." It was not a good way to start out in life, motherless and stuck to the father who would eat, sleep, or go a full hour without crying. An exhausted, grief-stricken state, there were only two facts Robert knew for sure. One, he was all that Tyler had, and two, he was not enough. Robert had muddled through the last 2 years, managing to hold down a job and somehow provide for Tyler with food, clothing, and shelter. Robert had withdrawn from his friends because he didn't want their pity and wanted a single father of a toddler. Grabbing a bite to eat after work with his buddies was not an option. At 5 o'clock sharp, he had to leave the office to pick up Tyler from daycare. After that, it was time to go home and fix his supper. Then came playtime and bath time, and if Robert was lucky and Tyler would actually fall asleep, bedtime. The toddler owner manual was clear. Without a regular schedule, life with a toddler descended into chaos. Robert was quite enough chaos in his life, so he tried not to deviate from the daily schedule. Once Tyler was finally asleep, Robert mindlessly surfed through channels on TV and played Warrior's Way on his laptop. Sometimes Bartholomew, the orange cat, sat with him, and most often he did not. Bartholomew had been Anna's pet before she and Robert got married, and Anna used to refer to him jokingly as "my first husband" because of the way he guarded her jealously, and had never warmed up to Robert. Now, with Anna gone, Bartholomew accepted food and an occasional pat from Robert, but he never gave Robert the impression that he was doing anything more than tolerating him because he was a dispenser of cat food. Was Robert lonely? Yes, painfully so. But he was also too busy and exhausted to do anything about it. After Tyler's bedtime, he was allowed himself 2 or 3 hours of mindless screen time and one kind of another until he fell into bed with himself, knowing that he was going to wake up the day nearly identical to the one before. With this type of duration of Tyler's mood swings, he had been the only wild card. Right now, though, as Tyler was contentedly picking up Cheerios and stuffing them down his mouth, he was adorable. His hazel eyes the same shade as Anna's, and framed by long, soothing eyelashes. His curly black hair surrounding the head like a halo, and his mouth was a cherubic rosebud, also like his mom's. In fact, Tyler resembled his mother in so much that it made Robert's heart hurt. Looking at his son, Robert felt overwhelmed by the love and not the fear. What if he lost Tyler like he'd lost Anna? Over and over, what ifs played on the screen in his mind like a trailer in a movie like no one ever wanted to see. Even though Robert couldn't look at Tyler without thinking of Anna, he never talked to Tyler about her. Tyler was too young to understand death, and Robert wasn't doing much of a great job of understanding it with himself. In his heart, he knew that it would probably be a good idea to start showing Tyler pictures of the mom and telling him the little stories of the kind of person she was and things that he used to say and do. How excited she had been in becoming his mommy, but he would never bring himself to take out the pictures of Anna hidden in the attic. If he tried to talk about her, the words struck in his throat and he said nothing. Even saying her name hurt too much, especially because of the time he looked at Tyler, he was staring it down in his eyes, like he did every weekday morning. Robert choked back the sadness along with some black coffee and drove Tyler to daycare, letting him play with his phone all the way. After he dropped off Tyler, he went to work, only nodding at colleagues who greeted him as "good morning." He didn't want to seem rude, but he didn't want to get into a conversation either. His own reactions were too unpredictable. Once he started talking, what would he say? What would all the emotional in front of someone he didn't even know very well? Would he break down entirely? What if he did break down? What if he wasn't able to put the pieces back together? Robert knew that no matter how bad he felt, he had to hold on to this job. It was the only way to make any kind of life for Tyler. And so today, like every other day, he sat in his cubicle and worked without stopping, trying to be empty in his mind and everything but the task in front of him. He stopped at the noon and took out his sandwich, eating it so mindlessly that once he finished it, he couldn't even care as he identified with what kind of sandwich it would have been. He walked to the bathroom and then to the water cooler. He was refilling the water bottle when a voice behind him said, "Hey." He jumped as though it startled the only person in the building. He turned around to see Jess, a nice, speckled copy editor and self-confessed grammar nerd who had been hired at the same time he was. She and he used to chat a bit before Anna died, before he was broken. "Hey, Jess," he said, moving away to let her have his turn of water cooler, and, he hoped, to go back to his desk without being disturbed further. He turned to walk away. "Hold up a sec," Jess said. "Me?" Robert said, even though it was clearly him she was talking to. Reluctantly, he turned around. "I was just noticing you're eating your sad little sandwich at your desk." Jess filled up one of those weird paper cups from the water in the cooler, who had decided to use adequate drinking vessels. She grinned at him. "Well, maybe it was a delicious sandwich, but it looked sad to me. And I was thinking, I know you can't go out after work because you've got a kiddo to fetch, and a lot of us go out half-price sushi on Wednesdays at lunch. Maybe you can go with us sometime." Sushi had been Robert and Anna's favorite food. They had learned to love it in college, and they also learned to use chopsticks together, picking up sushi rolls, dunking them in soy sauce, and popping them in each other's mouth. While a lot of couples went out for steaks or seafood or Italian at special occasions, for them, it was always sushi. How could going out for half-price sushi with a bunch of random people like work from work live up to those romantic sushi dinners with Anna? The answer was simple. It couldn't. It was only bring back memories and make them sadder. Still, Jess was nice of asking him, for taking pity on him. "Yeah, well, maybe I'll join you sometime," Robert said, not trying to sound convincing. "Thanks for inviting me." "Okay," Jess said, sounding surprisingly disappointed. "Robert?" "Yeah?" He didn't know where he was going, and he already knew he didn't like it. Wasn't this a workplace? Shouldn't they be working? She looked down for a minute and was collecting her thoughts. "You know," she began, "before things changed so much for you, you and I used to be friends. We used to talk. You never want to talk again. I'm here." Robert knew he was in danger of the emotions bubbling on the surface, which couldn't happen. He wouldn't let the basket case at work. He had to get out of the conversation, get back to this. "That's very kind." Jess rolled her eyes. "I'm being kind, you goof." "I'm not being kind, you goof. I like you. I've always enjoyed your company. I'm a single parent too. Not for the same reason you are, maybe, but I bet we could still go through a lot of the same stuff. Talking about something that might be good for our sanity. What's left of it." Robert felt himself smile a little. Against his will, he was remembering why he always liked Jess. "I'm down to crumbs myself," he said. It was a joke. We saw a lot of jokes. It contained the truth. "I hear you, and who knows? Maybe our kids could hang out. We could take turns watching each other's Rugrats, and we would be able to have an evening out every once in a while. Don't make any promises. You haven't met my kid yet," Robert said, who had made 2 jokes in a row. "He's 2, right?" "Yes." "Well, maybe I should give it a year or 2 before I offer my babysitting services," he smiled at him. A warm, gentle, genuine smile. "Listen, I'm giving you a free pass this week, but next Wednesday, you're going out for half-price sushi with us. No more sad little sandwiches for you." Robert gave her a little wave. "I'll consider your invitation, thank you." He turned to go back to his cubicle. "It's not an invitation," Jess called behind him. "It's mandatory. Mandatory sushi. Which would be a great name for a band, by the way." Robert sat back down in his cubicle. He was pretty sure that the conversation with Jess was the longest conversation he'd had with a non-familiar family member in months. Like someone who had been exercising in years and suddenly finds himself back on the treadmill, he was exhausted. No more chit-chat today. He stayed at his desk where he worked non-stop until 5. When it was time for leave, he felt no sense of relief. He was simply moving from one series of tasks in one location to another series of tasks in another. Off went the graphic designer hat, and on went the dad hat. Robert pulled into the parking lot of a tiny tot academy and went into the cheerful red roof building to fetch his son. He entered the room with a big red number 2 on the door. The walls were peppered in construction paper cutouts and unintentionally abstract crayon scribbles drawings. Robert found Tyler's baby young teacher, Miss Lauren, surrounded by toddlers playing with brightly colored toys and colored on the floor. While being outnumbered by volatile little people seemed terrifying to Robert, Miss Lauren looked perfectly at home and greeted Robert with a smile. She stood up and get close to Robert's eye level. "He was a happy boy for most of the today," he said. "Though there was one little thing I should tell you about." Robert braced himself for bad news. He hoped Tyler hadn't hit some other kid or bitten somebody. It seemed like every day care had one kid who was the biter. Nobody wanted to be the biter's parent. Miss Lauren smiled again. "Don't worry, he didn't attack anybody or anything." Robert let himself breathe a little. Miss Lauren pushed back on her curly brown hair behind her ears. "It's just that today I asked the kids to draw pictures of their families and talk about them being 2. Most of them just drew blobs or scribbles, but then we sat in a circle and everybody talked about their families and who were their pictures. Tyler's friend Noah noticed Tyler didn't have a mom in his picture and asked him about it. Tyler got a little upset, I think mostly because someone pointed out his family was different. Robert hated to think of Tyler being singled out because of his loss. Did that kind of behavior have to start so early? Aren't these kids being alone? Do you even notice that kind of thing? He asked. He looked around the toddlers in the room, playing with blocks and trucks or dolls. They were babies, really. Miss Lauren smiled again. "Oh, you'd be surprised what they notice. They don't miss much, believe me. I told Noah the rest of the class that not all kids have a mommy and a daddy, and that they're all different kinds of families. And I talked about what some of these families might look like. I said the only thing you need to have to make a family is people and the love. So I guess you could say it turned out into a teachable moment. Robert stiffened. He hated the thought of his and Tyler's broken little family being used as a teachable moment. And for what? So the other kids could feel sorry for Tyler instead of making fun of him? He didn't want his son to be an object of ridicule, but he didn't want to be an object of pity either. And there was no point of saying anything negative to Miss Lorraine. He was so young and bright-eyed and idealistic that criticizing her would be like kicking a friendly puppy. He already finally heard himself say, "Thank you for letting me know. It sounds stiffer and more formal than necessary, but at least it was polite." "You're welcome," Miss Lorraine said. "I just thought I would say something in case, you want to talk about it with Tyler at home." "Right," Robert said. "But you didn't want to talk about it. Not at home, not with a son, and definitely not here, with a near stranger. You ready to go, buddy?" He called to Tyler from across the brightly decorated room. Tyler looked up from the plastic dump truck and he was rolling back and forth and said, "Daddy." He grinned, jumped up, and ran to Robert, his arms outstretched. "See," Miss Lorraine said, "a happy boy." Robert had a hard time taking comfort in his statement. If Tyler was a happy boy, it was only because he didn't yet understand what he was missing. Robert didn't really want to stop for groceries on the way home, but he didn't see any way around it. Robert didn't care much about eating, but he knew it was nothing else. He had to make sure his kids' basic needs were met. Once he got Tyler safely strapped into his car seat, he said, "We need to stop at the store on the way home, buddy. We're out of milk and juice." Tyler's ran on milk and juice, by the way his cars ran on gasoline. They had to have the habit, and they burned their way through at an alarming expensive rate. "Milk, dues," Tyler said. "That's right. We'll buy some at the store. You can pick what kind of juice you want." "Bapple," Tyler sang, and for some reason when he said the word apple, it came out with a B at the beginning. "You want some apple juice?" Robert said. It was the way Tyler owner's manual said to handle kids' mispronunciations. He did not attention to him, but to make sure you repeated the word correctly. "Yeah, bapple juice," Tyler cheered. "You got it, buddy." Robert turned into an all-mart parking lot and prepared himself for the ordeal of shopping. Tyler owned one t-shirt with the Freddy Fazbear on it, but Robert had never thought of his son as Freddy fanatic. He was too little for one thing, and as he pushed Tyler into the shopping cart past the toy aisles, though, Tyler pointed an index finger and yelled, "Freddy!" at the top of his tiny lugs. "And what was that, buddy?" Robert asked, looking around to see what Tyler was seeing. For a second, he thought Freddy was a kid Tyler recognized from daycare. "Freddy, Freddy!" Tyler yelled, his eyes wide with excitement. Robert followed the line of his son's pointing fingers, display identical plush brown bears with wide smiles, big, thick black eyebrows, and black top hats. The packaging proclaimed that Tyler was looking at. The toy called Tag Along Freddy. But how did Tyler know that? With a surge of guilt, Robert realized now Tyler most likely knew. When Robert was especially exhausted and Stu sat at the cope, this happened more than he would like to admit. He had plopped Tyler down in front of the TV, only let him watch age-appropriate programming and the cartoons. While there were no doubt eye candy with bright colors and rapidly shifting images, did he at least make a pretense of having some educational value? But then there were the commercials, the terrible, terrible commercials designed to buy board rooms of cynical suits in Madison Avenue to make children desire Technicolor sugar blobs masquerading as cereal, high fructose corn syrup suspensions masquerading as juice drinks, and the latest toys past the most popular pop culture trends. "You want to look at one of the Freddys?" Robert asked. Tyler nodded and held out his hand. Robert placed the toy in Tyler's hands, and Tyler's mouth spread into a beautiful smile and conjured the ghost of his mother. Even though the bear was encased in cardboard packaging, he drew it to him in his head. "Wuv," he said. Well, shoot, Robert thought. It was hard to argue with Wuv. "Now you have to be careful with that bear," Robert said. "We've decided we're going to buy it." When we looked at the price sticker, he was surprised how expensive it was. "Yikes," he muttered. "Buy?" Tyler asked, still clutching the toy in his hands. "Mine?" "Well, let me read the packaging and see if it's even safe for kids your age," Robert said. He pulled another bear off the shelf and turned it over. The pictures on the back of the box showed laughing toddlers playing with the tag-along Freddy and, interestingly, a woman dressed like she worked in an office showing out her wristwatch and smiling like all was well in the world. Robert read the text on the back. "Tag Along Freddy, this is a kid's and parents' best pal. Freddy goes where your little one goes and sends you the live updates, and you tag along time wristwatch included. So you'll know that your little one is happy and safe. You may have to be out of sight sometimes, but Tag Along Freddy is the bear who is always there." Robert thought of all the times he had to tend to something in the kitchen and take an important phone call and leave Tyler unattended. This was amazing. How could it go wrong in just a few seconds? He recalled once when he left the living room long enough to stir a pot on the stove and turned to find Tyler scaling a bookcase like King Kong climbing Empire State Building. He would see how this Tag-Along Freddy would come in handy, especially with a single parent like him. When you took into account that the toy was also a safety device, the price didn't seem so outrageous. "Tyler," he said, "would you like to take Freddy home with you?" Tyler's whole face lit up with a beautiful smile. "Yeah, Daddy, thank you." That Miss Lorraine at daycare had told Robert that they've been working on pleases and thank yous, and this is the first time he ever heard Tyler say thank you. without being prompted by, what do we say? You're welcome, buddy, and I'm loving those good manners. Getting the bear and the wristwatch set up when working was mildly annoying, but could have been worse. After about 15 minutes of fussing with directions and batteries, Robert had everything in working order. He handed the bear over to Tyler and said, "Why don't you play with Freddy while I get your supper started?" "Freddy," Tyler said, giving the bear a hug. In the kitchen, Robert put a pot of water to boil and dumped the contents of the jar of spaghetti sauce into a pan. He was letting the lettuce, carrots, and cucumbers out of the fridge and started the salad when his tag-along Freddy time wristwatch vibrated. The screen said, "A message from Freddy." Robert tapped the screen with Dexter. "It's all good. I'm playing with my best buddy." "Cute." Robert couldn't help but smile. Robert sliced carrots and cucumbers for a salad, but then pasta to a boil. When he went to the living room to tell Tyler it's time to eat, the little boy was holding Freddy up to his lap and reading to him from one of the little board books. "My first book of colors." Every time Tyler did something this adorable, Robert wished Anna was here to see it. But who was he kidding? He always wished Anna was there. I Freddy's daddy," Tyler said. "You are, huh? That's pretty cool," Robert said. "Are you and Freddy ready for supper?" Robert expected at least a small argument, but since Tyler was in the middle of reading, but he said, "Okay, Daddy," tucked in his bear under his arm, and followed Robert to the kitchen. When he helped Tyler in his place at the table, Tyler set Freddy down in the chair next to him and said, "Freddy, plate." "You want Freddy to have a plate too?" Robert asked. "Uh-huh," Tyler said, nodding like it was a very serious matter. Feeling more like than a little silly, Robert set a plate and a cup of spot on the table in front of the toy bear. He set down a plate of spaghetti and a bowl of salad in front of Tyler, along with a sippy cup of milk. "Now Freddy has to eat pretend food, or he'll get all messy," Robert said. "He'll eat pretend spaghetti," and then, because he knew rhymes cracked Tyler up, he said, "Freddy spaghetti." Tyler giggled, but his dad had made the funniest joke in the world. "Freddy sketty," he yelled, then laughed some more, laughing the table in hilarity. "He's ready for Freddy spaghetti," Robert said. He was milking the joke, but that's what you did when you had a 2-year-old audience. There was not much occasion for subtle wit. Robert and Tyler ate spaghetti and salad and laughed a lot. Even Robert had to admit it was a fun time. The downside of feeding Tyler spaghetti was that it made a mass necessary pronto. Tyler's face was so smeared with orange goo when he smiled, he looked like a jack-o'-lantern. Somehow he'd even managed to get noodles in his hair. "Okay, buddy," Robert said, steeling himself with a preparation for a tantrum. "We're gonna have to straighten the bathtub after this." "Freddy bath too?" Tyler asked. "Freddy can't get wet, but he can come along," Robert said. "Okay, Daddy," Tyler said, picking up his bear and walking toward the bathroom. Taking Tyler to a bath usually involved such elaborate negotiations. Robert felt like he could involve the United Nations. He could believe tonight's routine was going so easy. It was funny, though. As much as Tyler usually argued about bath time, he was in the water, he loved it. Robert threw Tyler's collection of rubber duckies and toy boats in the water. The boy was happy to splash and play. Robert set Freddy down on Tyler's toddler step stool in a safe distance from the splash zone, but Tyler could still see him. Tyler held up each of his bathtub toys to show Freddy. "Freddy, this my blue boat. Freddy, this my yellow ducky." 2-year-olds love to show off and brag about their material possessions. Robert had noticed. When Tyler talked to his grandma on the phone, most of what he had was a list of toys he owned. It was like he was some kind of business tycoon bragging about how many cars and houses he owned. After Tyler was clean in his choo-choo train pajamas, Robert tucked him into bed with his tag-along Freddy. "You want me to read a book to you, buddy?" Robert asked. "2 books," Tyler said. Robert pretended to be aghast at such an outrageous request. "2 books? Because I'm 2, Tyler said. He explained everything. "Well, I guess I can't argue with that." Robert scooted his chair next to Tyler's bed and looked over Tyler's bookshelf. "The Silly Chicken," Tyler said. Robert pulled out a book of The Silly Chicken. "Do the voices," Tyler said. Robert read the book of The Silly Chicken, complete with silly chicken voices. Tyler giggled because the book was funny, but also, Robert suspected, because it was hilarious to hear your parent making a fool of himself. "Now the piggy one," Tyler said. Robert obeyed. By the end of the piggy stories, Tyler's eyes were droopy, and seconds after Robert closed the book, Tyler wrapped his arm around Tag-Along Freddy and went right to sleep. Robert couldn't believe how much easier regular tasks of parenting had become with Tag-Along Freddy. He couldn't believe that he almost didn't buy the bear because it seemed too expensive. Yeah, it would have been worth it twice the price. Robert got soda in the snack fridge and settled in to watch a dumb but fun action movie he'd missed because he never got to the theater anymore. He knew he'd rehire a sitter, but he already felt bad leaving Tyler in daycare all day. He wanted to spend all the time he could with him. The little boy had already been deprived of a mom. As a dad, Robert wasn't really feel adequate or enough. At least he could do was try to be present as all he could. Just like in school, if you weren't great at it, you would generally get by if you put some effort and showed up. It wasn't great parenting philosophy, but it was one Robert could work with. As the movie's opening credits ran, Robert felt a buzz from Tag-Along wristwatch. The screen said, "Message for Freddy." He tapped and text said, "Fast asleep." Nice. Robert let himself relax. The movie was the exact thing Anna would have hated, but Robert enjoyed the brainless entertainment of cars chasing each other and guns blazing. He knew that he would enjoy the movie more if Anna was beside him, making snarky comments about the improbability of the situation and the cheesiness of the acting. He always been so tolerant of him being equally snarky when they watched romantic comedies she liked. Even with this ever-present loneliness, he was still one of the most relaxing nights he had in a long time. He knew that tackling on Freddy to thank for his very easy evening. Tag-along Freddy accompanied Tyler to breakfast table the next morning and then went to the daycare. Tyler didn't even ask to play with Robert's phone in the car. He called Freddy and talked to him instead. When they arrived at the class, Miss Lorian sat on the floor and examined Tyler's new toy. "Who's your friend?" she asked. "Freddy," Tyler said, sounding proud and delighted. He had a hair bared to Miss Lauren's face, so it seemed to kiss her cheek. Miss Lauren laughed. "Freddy's very friendly." "I know you usually discourage bringing toys from home," Robert said, "but we had Bear yesterday and he absolutely refuses to part with it." Miss Lorian smiled and looked at Tyler, who was cuddling Freddy against his chest. "It'd be obvious to anyone that happy the toy made him." "Well then, I think we can make an exception in this case." Robert knew the teachers of the daycare cut Tyler some slack because he didn't have a mom. Just a sad but well-meaning dad who often seemed incompetent and overwhelmed. While on one hand he didn't like being looked at with pity, on the other hand he was happy to take all the breaks he could. Every once in a while, as Robert worked in the cubicle, his tag-along Freddy time wristwatch would vibrate. He would tap it and read a text from Freddy. "Messy fun with finger paints. Lum young shine. Nap time. He's snoozing away." There was something comforting about those messages and the way Robert pictured what Tyler was doing over the course of the day. Made him feel less isolated. He was part of something, a family. He and Tyler may have not been a complete family that Robert longed for, but they were still a family. Just like Miss Lorraine explained the idea of family to Tyler's class, there were people who loved each other, and that was count for something. Saturday morning after breakfast, Robert grabbed a second cup of coffee and helped Tyler down with his booster seat. "It's a beautiful morning, buddy. Why don't we go outside and play in your sandbox?" "Yeah, sandbox," Tyler said. He grabbed his Freddy doll in his hand and Daddy's hand in the other. "Freddy play too?" "Okay," Robert said. "Freddy can come too, but he can't get in the sandbox. The sand will be bad for his fur." Robert settled on some kind of deal with a helpful inanimate object with a tag-along Freddy would give Robert regular updates on Tyler's safety and well-being. And in return, Robert would prevent Tyler from submerging Freddy in water, smearing him with spaghetti sauce, coating him in sand, or exposing him to other messy form of peril. It was a mutually beneficial relationship. Outside, Tyler perched up tag-along Freddy on the side of the van box. Robert supposed that was Freddy could watch him play. Robert settled on a chair in the porch and sipped a cup of coffee and watched Tyler play too. Tyler loved his sandbox. It was filled with toy dump trucks and bulldozers and other construction vehicles. Tyler loved taking his plastic shovel, filling his dump truck with sand, moving it around and making vroom sounds, then dumping out the sand, only to fill it up again and never got old, as far as Robert could tell. From inside the house, Robert heard his phone ringing. He meant to bring it outside and left it on the kitchen counter. Parents made him so scattered that it seemed like he was always leaving something behind. "Hey, buddy, I'm gonna go get the phone," Robert said. "You okay to stay in the sandbox?" "Okay, Daddy," Tyler said, shoveling sand into the bed of the dump truck. "I'll be right back," Robert called. Robert ran to the kitchen and picked up the phone. His voicemail icon piped up, and he clicked on it. It was a recorded message from a sketchy-sounding company trying to sell him homeowners insurance he didn't need. He deleted the message heading outside. The sandbox was empty. The fear gripped Robert's heart. "Tyler," he yelled. "Tyler!" No answer. He ran up sandbox. You could see indentation of sand where Tyler had been sitting, but no Tyler. Tyler's tag-along Freddy still sat on the edge of the sandbox. Clearly, Freddy had not been watching. Robert looked at the open gate. It had been closed before, hadn't it? He saw a white van he didn't recognize driving away. Could Tyler be inside that van? It was the absolute worst thing he'd imagined. Robert felt a tag-along Freddy time wristwatch vibrate, and soon announced a message from Freddy. He tapped on the icon, and the message appeared on the screen. "Gone." "Gone," Robert screamed. "Gone? How's that supposed to help me?" He kicked the stuffed bear as hard as he could, sending a smile sailing across the road. "Tyler, Tyler!" He yelled some more. He ran out to the street, yelling. Neighbors came out of their houses, asked what was wrong, but no one seen his son. Because someone had opened the gate, come into the yard, and snatched his son. In a few seconds, it took him to go inside the house and grab his phone. It seemed possible, but yet you saw that kind of thing on the news all the time. Those people who could get it thought it was possible too. The kind of thing that happened to other people, but not you. Until it did. His phone. He forgot he was still holding his phone. Time was wasting. He called the police. They arrived quickly. He gave them that. There were two officers, an old man with salt-paper hair and a young, dark-haired woman. "So, at the time when you noticed your son was missing," the young officer said. His demeanor was professional, and Robert could hear the genuine concern in her voice. He read Ramirez. "Maybe 20 minutes ago," Robert said. He was so panicked he could get his breath. "He was in the sandbox. I ran into the house to get my phone, and when I came back, he was gone." "And there's no chance that he would have come into the house while you're getting your phone and hiding somewhere?" "Some kids get a kick out of hiding," the older officer, whose badge read Cook, said. "You'd be amazed how many kids I found hiding under beds or in closets, giggling like crazy how bad they scared their mom or dad." "No, I would have heard him. He would come back in the house," Robert said. "Also, the front gate was open when I came back, and I'm pretty sure it was closed before, and I saw a white van from the street. I didn't know it belonged to anybody in the neighborhood. Maybe he was abducted by someone in that van." Officer Ramirez was taking notes fiercely. "Did you get the van's license plate number?" "No, it drove way too fast. I'm sorry." In fact, Robert hadn't even thought about getting van's license plate number. You would think I'd never seen a cop show or TV, he thought. "I'm incompetent. I'm too incompetent to be a parent. Now Tyler's paying the price." "That's okay," Officer Ramirez said. "I know it's upsetting. I need to know through all of these questions. You have the information we need to find your son. Now, does his son's mother live with you?" "No, she died of childbirth having Tyler. If she weren't dead," Robert thought, Tyler probably would be missing, because would at least have one competent parent. I'm sorry to hear that, Officer Ramirez said. Could you give us a physical description of your son? He's 2 years old, Robert said. Hazel eyes, dark hair, and about 3 feet tall. I think he weighed 28 pounds at the last doctor's visit. Conjuring up a vivid picture of Tyler made his disappearance all the more painful. 3 feet tall and 28 pounds. He was so tiny, so helpless. Here, I can send you a picture of him. He fumbled his phone. Can you tell us about the clothing Tyler was wearing at the time of the disappearance? Officer Ramirez continued. What clothes did Robert picked up for Tyler this morning? He didn't pay much attention because he wasn't anticipating being quizzed on them. Play clothes, blue shorts. I think it was a t-shirt with Freddy Fazbear on it. Fazbear's name made him think painful of the message on the wristwatch. Gone. He had to pull himself together for Tyler's sake. Red sneakers, he said. And still in diapers, if that matters. Tears sprang in his eyes. Tyler was still just a baby. Thank you, Officer Ramirez said. So, what are you going to do to find him? Robert asked. Officer Cook, who had seemed content to let his partner ask more of the questions, finally chimed in. Sir, when a child this young is missing, you be sure that not someone we take lightly. We'll scour the entire area. We'll see if we can get any info about the van. We'll be in touch. Right now, home is the best place for you to be, and your phone close by. Are you going to put one of those alerts for missing children? Robert asked. He would remember the alerts were called, but he got them on his phone, and for some frequency, and always found them upsetting. He couldn't help but imagine frightening children and the frantic parents, and how he was one of the parents. An Amber Alert, an old officer said. We will if we don't find him quickly and we feel like he's in immediate danger. Of course he's in danger, Robert shouted. He's 2 years old and either run off by himself or has been abducted by a maniac. How would he not be in danger? We understand you're upset, Officer Ramirez said, patting his arm. His very parents' worst nightmare, and we're going to do everything in our power to get Tyler back to you as quickly as possible, safe and sound. It was 5 p.m. where he was still no leads. The police had assured him they were asking around about a suspicious white van and hadn't received any useful information yet. Robert asked the coach, staring ahead in a daze. He had never felt so useless, so worthless. He only had one job that mattered, and was keep his son safe, and he had failed miserably. Everyone he loved died or disappeared. He wouldn't protect anyone. Now he was all alone. He probably served him right. Robert's wristwatch vibrated. He felt a saw a flutter of hope. Maybe the watch had some information about Tyler's whereabouts. He typed the message from Freddie. It texted me, why don't you go to the cliffs? Robert shivered at the thought of temperature in the room, and he dropped to 40 degrees. Jumper's cliff. His own thoughts had been headed in direction about Anna. Without Tyler, without reason, he had to keep on living. Apparently, he was so worthless, even a child's toy thought he was a waste of good organs. Stop, Robert thought. Tyler had been missing for a full 8 hours. If he was still alive, Robert had to be there with him. He wasn't much, but he was still all Tyler had. He would try to do better, try not to fail his son next time. He looked over the mantel where he set the tackle on Freddy, where he brought it back into the house. He knew it was ridiculous, but he felt like the bear was mocking him, judging him. Robert wasn't a superstitious person, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the toy was somehow bad luck. He grabbed it, holding it between his thumb and forefinger where it was a dead rat. He carried it outside, lifted a lid garbage can, and dumped it inside. Back in the house, Robert sat down on the couch. Normally at this time, he'd be thinking about what Tyler would have for supper. Usually on Saturdays, he made something simple. Hot dogs or grilled cheese sandwiches. Sometimes he'd order a pizza and then they come in the movies that Tyler loved. The kind of a cartoon animal was being heroic. Robert wished he could be more heroic. His phone rang. He answered before time to ring. Mr. Stanton? Is this Detective Ramirez? Did you find him? Robert's heart was pounding in his chest. Not yet, sir, but we have officers all over the city. We also have the use of a dog and a tremendous track record when it comes to locating missing persons. I know this seems like a regular request, but do you have some piece of clothing that belongs to your son we can use the dog to sniff? An unwashed shirt that was a laundry hamper, maybe? I'm sure I do, yes. Robert always been behind on laundry. He counted on one of many failings, but in this case, maybe it was actually helpful. Well, if it's okay with you, I may come by and get it. Of course, Robert said, trying to keep his voice from breaking. Anything that might help you find him. Once he was off the phone, Robert went to Tyler's room. He looked for Tyler's little toddler bed and thought about all the nights he'd peeked in a room and seen Tyler there, sleeping in that deep, peaceful way only a small children can sleep. How would he give anything to see Tyler lying there right now? Anything. He reached into the laundry hamper and pulled out a light blue striped shirt Tyler worn just the day before. When he held it up, it seemed impossibly small like a doll's clothes, and his shirt was nose inhaled. Later on dirt, sweet apple juice, and sweet, hay-like aroma. He thought of a little boy smell. His little boy smell. Robert sat down on Tyler's bed and put his face in his hands and sobbed. By the time Detective Ramirez arrived to pick up the shirt, Robert had calmed down a little, but his eyes were still red and swollen. I know it's hard, Detective Ramirez said. Probably the hardest thing you've ever been through, but I promise you that we'll do all we can to find your little boy. Try to get some rest, okay? After the officer left, Robert sank back into the living room couch. It's probably the hardest thing he ever had been through, but losing Anna had been terribly hard too. He knew everybody had come bad with something to him. He certainly felt like he had more than a fair share of suffering. His phone vibrated and clicked on the message icon, which said, why don't you go to the cliffs? Robert's anger flashed at white hot. Maybe it wasn't so crazy to think the bear was judging him after all. It was urging him to commit suicide. Well, he wasn't going to have it. He stomped outside in a garbage can where he dumped the thing. He brought the bear back in the house. Somehow it made him less nervous to have the thing where he could see it. He hopped hoped it wasn't losing his mind. He was under thinkable amounts of stress, of course, and he needed to keep it together for Tyler. Rest, Detective Ramirez told him, for some rest. Instead of going back to the couch, Robert walked down the hallway in his bedroom, carrying the bear. He sat the bear down on the bed, looking at it. He felt much of a surge of hate in the toy, and his stomach roiled. He ran to the bathroom, stretched in the toilet. Though not much came up. He hadn't eaten since breakfast. Breakfast seemed like years ago. Everything had still been normal at breakfast. Everything had been normal until he brought Tackle on Freddy into the house. Back in the bedroom, Robert glared at a offending bear. He drew back his fist and punched it in the face again and again. It quickly became apparent that his punches were all that effective. The bear's face would cave in, and Robert's fist made contact with it, but then it sprung back into place. Robert wasn't doing any harm. Then one thing he wanted, other than getting Tyler back home safely, was to harm the bear. Robert tagged along Freddy by its ear and carried it downstairs. He went to the kitchen to retrieve the box of matches. He kept it on a high shelf in the cabinet out of Tyler's reach. He carried Freddy outside the trash can and threw him back in. He struck the match and held it to the bear, waiting for it to catch fire. The bear's foot smoldered a little but refused to burst into flames. It was probably tested with some chemical, Robert thought, and to make it flame retardant. A safety feature. Well, we have to put a stop to that. He grabbed the bottle of lighter fluid and kept near the grill. Robert doused the bear with lighter fluid, and then he struck another match and threw it in the garbage can. Tackle on Freddy went up a satisfying whoosh of flames. Robert watched it burn for a few minutes, then used a garden hose to extinguish the fire. He didn't want to accidentally burn the whole house down. Once the fire died out, he felt a small amount of relief. He knew it didn't make any logical sense, but he still felt that destroying the bear would somehow help find Tyler. At the very least, there wouldn't be some voice to keep telling Robert to kill himself. After he could rest, he let off Ramirez had ordered him to. He made sure the last of the fire was extinguished. He went back in his bedroom, undressed, and crawled under covers. He was pretty sure there was no way he was going to sleep, but it was still relief to lie down. He was so exhausted, every bone and muscle in his body was heavy with lead. He didn't lose consciousness, but lay there in a short stupor, his eyes open, not really seeing. The vibration of Tackle on Freddy time wristwatch started Robert. But that was impossible. He had destroyed the bear. He couldn't read the messages anymore. Maybe he really was asleep and this was a dream. Wouldn't it be wonderful if all this had been a really bad dream? Robert slapped down his face and felt it sting. He wasn't dreaming. He lifted his arm and looked at his watch. A message from Freddy was flashing. He was shaking it. He tapped the icon. Why don't you go to the cliffs? No, Robert yelled, clapping his hand over his ears. No, this is impossible. The bear is practically just ashes now. You can still be telling me to kill myself. You can't be telling me anything. Robert ran outside and lifted the lid of garbage can. The Fred doll was charred. It was still grinning. He reached inside the can and pulled it out. The bear stank of smoke and lighter fluid, and his sink and blackened in some places was still intact. Robert knew he had spent too much time with that adult company since Anna died, and sometimes he felt so sad and lonely he wondered if he would see a therapist. But now it seemed he had moved beyond the need for just talking to a caring professional. The trauma of losing Tyler after losing Anna had caused him to lose something else. His mind. But he had destroyed the bear. He knew what he'd seen. When Robert first seen the bear in the store, he thought it was cute. A nice, cuddly friend for his little boy. But now the bear's once charming smile looked malevolent, like its black eyebrows seemed to slant downward, a classic cartoon depiction of evil. And it was all clear now. Robert had brought the bear into the house, and Tyler had disappeared. Tyler's disappearance was the bear's fault. The bear could not continue to exist. Robert fished his car keys out of his pocket. He placed the bear in the driveway in the direct path as the car left front tire. Then he got into the car and started it. He left only a slight resistance as he drove over the bear. Then he put the car in reverse and backed over it. Then he ran over it one last time, leaving the bear's body trapped beneath the tire. A furry Freddy pancake. He was going back inside the house. He heard the phone ringing. He could be so stupid to leave his phone inside. It was the exact kind of stupidity got Tyler kidnapped in the first place. He ran over to... Yes? He panted out of breath. Mr. Stanton, this is Detective Ramirez. Are you okay? Oops. I flipped to the wrong page. It is such an absurd question to be almost laugh. Of course he wasn't okay. His child was missing, and he had spent the last 5 minutes intentionally running over a child's favorite stuffed toy. These are not actions of a person who was okay. He decided that the question didn't deserve an answer. Instead, he only asked the question that mattered. Did you find him? Not yet, Mr. Stanton, but I wanted to let you know the dog has a scent now, and he's searching for him. We also have tag numbers of every white van in the metro area. We're running them to see if any owners have a history of criminal activity. Working hard to find your boy. I'll call you in the morning and update you. But morning seemed like years away. Now he's going to make it into morning without Tyler, or without even any information about Tyler. Is there anything I should be doing? Stay close to the phone. Get some rest. Pray if you're praying short. And stay hopeful. Thank you, Robert said. But really, other than destroying the bear, there was nothing he could do. He was helpless. Hopeless case. It was hung up the phone, his wrist vibrated. How? He yelled. How? He knew what he was going to say. He was certainly attempted to run it over like the bear, but there was still a tiny chance, wasn't there? The watchman had some connection to Tyler. He located him some way. He gritted his teeth and tapped a message for Freddy. Why don't you go to the cliffs? Broken, Robert sank to his knees and cried. The more the bear told him to go to the cliffs, the more suicide seemed like a welcome relief from this pain. Sure, it would be terrifying standing at the edge, looking down at jagged rocks below, the willing himself to jump, but the fall would be so classy he wouldn't have time to think or feel anything. The force would smash into rocks would be so hard and die instantly. Even if there was some physical pain, it would still hurt less than the emotional pain that was ripping him apart. And without Anna and Tyler, what reason did he have to live? He went to the cliff. He would join Anna in death. Maybe there were even a possibility he would see her again in some spiritual plane. And of course, it was possible that Tyler was also. The thought was so terrifying, set Robert running back to the bathroom, wrench up non-existent contents of his stomach. He leaned over the toilet, gagging and sobbing. My little boy, my little boy. Those are the words that were playing in loop in his head. He flushed the toilet and stood up straight. He caught a glance of himself in the mirror, how shocked by what he saw. He seemed to age 10 years in a single day. His complexion was gray and his eyes were swollen and bloodshot. His face was streaked with tears and snot and impulse. He turned the water in the shower. Maybe standing on the spray would calm him down a little, loosening painful knots in his shoulders. He dressed and stepped into the stall, letting his hot jets of water pour down his neck and into his shoulders. He felt his exhausted mind begin to water. Tyler's first birthday. Knowing the joy of 1 year old takes in destruction. Robert had gotten Tyler a very special smash cake. He would destroy in addition to a large birthday cake that Robert would slice and serve. Tyler sat in his high chair wearing a canonical paper birthday hat. When the smash cake was set before him, he crackled the delight and immediately jammed both fists into it. He brought his fist down on the cake again and again, and eventually gave one of the frosting-covered hands an experimental lick. Apparently liking what he had discovered, he dove at his cake face first, coming up with a mouth and face full of frosting. Robert had filmed the whole thing, laughing. Robert then seemed so happy that day. He brought about the day, first of many happy birthdays for his son. The first of many birthdays he and Tyler would celebrate together. Had he been wrong? Freddys first echoed in his head. Why don't you go to the cliffs? 2 years before this birthday party, Robert had earned his first anniversary. The official gift for the wedding anniversary was supposed to be paper. Robert had checked the book in origami from the library. After a lot of failures and frustration, he learned how to make origami cranes. For weeks, he spent spare time he had folding pieces of paper into cranes. The night of the anniversary, he had gone to the favorite sushi restaurant. Robert had presented Anna with a box of 100 origami cranes. One crane, he said, for every year of happiness they would have together. Robert would known realistically that he and Anna wouldn't possibly have 100 years together, but in his darkest nightmares, he would never have dreamed that there had been only 1 year left, where some people were doomed to lose everything they loved. Or was it just Robert's own personal curse? The words again. Why don't you go to the cliffs? Robert stood under the shower where water ran cold. He stared into a shiver. He turned off his faucet and grabbed the towel. He dried himself off and put in his bathrobe. And he was shaking, not with cold, but with sadness and fear. How could the bear still be threatening him? Hadn't he destroyed it? Robert remembered the line from the description of the boy's packaging. Tag along, Freddy is the bear who's always there. Robert threw on an old t-shirt and a pair of shorts, then grabbed his scissors from the bathroom cabinet. He ran out of the house in the driveway. He yanked the dog under the car tire. He laid it flat on his back and stood in the car. He stabbed it over and over and over where a heart would be, if it had a heart. Where do I have to make you go away? Robert yelled as he kept on stabbing the little bear. Why don't you just die? You're not even supposed to be alive. The bear's chest was slashed to ribbons. Bits and stuffing poked up from between the tears. And Robert had been debating ripping off the stuffing when his wrist vibrated. He knew it could be expected. He knew it was awful. And the little flutter of hope from somewhere inside him whispered, What if? What if the news about Tyler? What if I could save him? He took time to breath and tapped the message from Freddy. Why don't you go to the cliffs? Why don't you go to the cliffs? Why don't you go to the cliffs? Why don't? Robert ripped off the watch and threw it against the pavement, smashing it. Finally, the watch was silent. He picked up the bear and looked at him blankly, googly eyes. All of his rage, all of his pain turned into numbness and somehow even worse. Fine, he said to the bear, feeling more emotionally drained than he ever felt. We will go to the cliffs together. It was the only logical thing to do, Robert thought. Robert was empty. He was a shell, like the house had burned so that all of his insides were destroyed. In the night, he not looked so bad from the outside, but really, there was nothing left to save. It was time to bring in wrecking ball and final demolition. It was just a formality. He picked up the bear and went into the house. In the kitchen, he filled the cat's food bowl until it was overflowing and put an extra bowl of water. That should hold Bartholomew until the police discovered Robert's body and came to search the house. The police would turn the cat over to the animal shelter. The shelter would find it a new home. It had never liked Robert anyway. Robert toyed briefly with the idea of leaving a note, but who would read it? Who would care? If he had anybody left to write to, it wouldn't be going to the cliffs in the first place. He grabbed the bear and walked out the front door, leaving it unlocked to make things easier for police arrived to investigate. With Tag-along Freddy in hand, he walked toward the cliffs. The night sky was changing to black and early morning gray. The neighbor, whose name Robert would never remember, was already up with this morning sun. He slowed down as he saw Robert started jogging in place. Any news about your son? The man asked. The neighborhood gossip machine was apparently working as efficiently as usual. Robert couldn't bring himself to speak, so he shook his head no. I'm sure he's fine, the man said, which Robert knew was a lie. How could the man be sure when the police haven't even had any information? Well, let me know if you need anything. Robert knew the man meant well, but really, let me know if you need anything was an absurd thing to say of someone in Robert's situation. I need my son back, Robert thought. But since the universe was too cruel to help, let me that. I need to jump off the cliffs. If you can't help me with neither of these things, then you're not no use to me. Goodbye." The man continued his run, and Robert started running in the opposite direction. But Robert wasn't moving like the man getting some exercise. He was moving like a man getting some exercise. He was running like a man pursued by demons. He ran until he reached the cliffs. He was a beeline for the everybody's called Jumper's Cliff. He's holding his tall, snuffed enemy. He stood in the summit and looked down the rocky ground far below, and felt his stomach drop under his shoes. He had already been afraid of heights, but had always considered it a sensible fear. It wasn't crazy to be afraid of something that could actually kill you, and now, even though death was his goal, he still felt afraid when he looked down. Robert held up a teddy bear and stared at it. "This is what you want, right?" he asked. Tears clouded Robert's eyes, and he thought of Anna dying in the operating table during what have been the happiest occasion of their life, the birth of their own son. He never would have chosen to make an early exit from life. She wouldn't have wanted Robert to make an early exit, neither, especially when, unlike her, he had a choice. The living Robert would have been doing since Anna died wasn't really living. Anna would have wanted him for them either. She wouldn't have wanted to shut out his friends and eat sad little sandwiches at his desk at work. She would have wanted to go out with his coworkers, eat prized sushi. He wanted to enjoy fatherhood, also enjoy the company of other grown-ups. Anna loved life and loved Robert. She wouldn't want him to give up on himself, but she wouldn't want him to give up on Tyler either, even the small hope that he might be alive. He thought of Tyler when he stretched out his arms up and say, "Pick me up, Daddy," and then he'd giggle and say, "Daddy, silly." And then they would play Tickle Monster, the rhyming game, or read books together. It was easy to get overwhelmed by the daily stresses of parenting, the effort of keeping a child clean and fed and cared for the day in and day out. It was undeniable. The will of a toddler often imposed a formidable challenge, but the truth was most of the time he and Tyler spent together was great. He wouldn't trade it for anything. If there was one small chance he would hear his little boy's voice again. Robert held up the despised bear and stared into his empty eyes. He drew back his arm and pitched the doll as hard as he could over the edge of the cliff. He spat over the ledge in defiance of the evil toy he almost made him do. Of what he almost let the toy make him do. "Tyler wouldn't want me to," Robert screamed after a pair of plummeted, and the rocks below. His voice echoed, "Two, two, two," in the canyon. Robert looked down the rocks below and also up to the sky. At dawn turned the clouds a rosy pink, the color of dress Anna used to wear. He always told her that dress brought out the rose of her cheek. Anna wanted to live, Tyler. Please, let him still be alive, Robert thought. Wanted to live. The two of them would have want Robert to live too. Robert looked down the rocky ground beneath him and pink clouds above him. Life was so hard, it would be beautiful. The two people he loved the most, and he wouldn't want him to lose any of that. Sun rose. Robert heard the early morning chirping of the birds and cry of some small animal he couldn't identify. The mewing of a kitten, perhaps. He cries for something below him in one of many holes that created shallow miniature caverns in the rock forest. The more Robert listened to cries, he decided it almost human. Could it be? Robert's heart felt as though he might be pounded in his chest. He might as well underside of the cliff. Resist the dangerous temptation to run. How embarrassing would it be if he decided to live and fall off the cliff by accident? If he got closer to the caverns, the cries became more distinct. The high kneeling of wounded animal. This would be a frightened human child. Robert stood in the front of the opening of the rock's face, hoping that he'd see his son, not wounded. Animal might attack him out of fear. "Tyler," he said. "Tyler, is that you?" "Daddy," Tyler's voice, weak from crying, came from a hole near Robert. "Daddy, Daddy, come get me." The hole wasn't wide enough for Robert's shoulders to fit through. "He can fit through the hole, buddy. You're gonna have to come to me. Come toward my voice, buddy. You can do it." You hear scrabbling in the hole, and then, it would have been more than a minute, Tyler poked his head in a rocky opening like some kind of woodland creature. He had it in his arms, and Robert scooped him and hugged him. Tyler was dirty and sweaty, an overnight stay in the caverns. But to Robert, he smelled sweeter than anything else in the world. "You scare me half to death, buddy," Robert said, holding Tyler close. "Why in the world would you run off like that?" "I saw a doggy," Tyler said, in the most logical answer in the world. "So you tried to follow a doggy and got lost?" "Uh-huh." Tyler rested his head on Robert's shoulder. "Well, that's very dangerous, buddy. You should never leave the yard unless I'm with you. Promise me you'll never do that again." "Okay, Daddy," Tyler said. Robert hoped he meant it. "Good, let's go home." "Yeah, carry me," Tyler said, and Robert could hear the tiredness in his voice. "Okay, buddy." Robert was tired too. But now he found his son. He felt like he had the strength to carry him a million miles. Robert carefully walked away from Trumpet's clothes. Tyler said, "Daddy?" "Yes, buddy?" "I'm thirsty." "I bet you are. A big cup of water as soon as we get home. And can I have a peanut, Nana?" "Sure." Robert knew his kid must be starving. He was happy to have an opportunity to make Tyler his favorite snack again. Sliced bananas, peanut butter, to dip them in. Tyler's like to eat things when they dip it in other things. "And I'll make you special mac and cheese for supper, okay?" "Yummy." Honestly, Robert's mac and cheese wasn't anything special, just a mix from Blue Box. It was special because Tyler was back and unharmed. They'd been eating it together. From now on, all their time together would be special. A thought occurred to Robert as he reached the lower cliffs. "Hang on a second, buddy. I want to see something." Without getting close to the edge, Robert peered down the direction where he was throwing the tackle on Freddy. The little bear was nowhere to be seen. "What do you see, Daddy?" Tyler asked. "Nothing, buddy. But look how pretty the sky is. Your mommy used to wear a dress the color of the clouds." He decided no longer to keep silent about Anna. Tyler needed to hear about his mom. Just as Robert needed to talk about her, they always talked to her. They thought about her. Their way each other would still be with him. "Mommy pretty," Tyler said. "Yes, she was," Robert said. "Would you like to look at some pictures of your mommy sometime soon?" "Yeah," Tyler said. Tomorrow, Robert decided. He would take a photos of Anna down in the attic. He would put some in the mantle and living room, maybe one in Tyler's room too. "We'll do that tomorrow then," Robert said. And I can tell you some stories about her, too. Your mommy was very pretty and smart and nice. Daddy's nice, too, Tyler said. It was a high compliment to a 2-year-old. Thanks, buddy. I love you, Robert said, holding Tyler securely. He walked farther and farther away from the cliffs. I love you, Daddy. Love you, too, buddy, Robert set Tyler down to the ground. Tyler slipped his hand into the daddy's, and they walked away together towards home. I hate him, Reed whispered through the gritted teeth. From across the aisle of dust, Shelley blew long, dark bangs from the forehead, glanced back of the Julius's head, then rolled her eyes at Reed. Tell me something I don't know. Reed looked at her sideways. Just saying. Julius, as usual, has been bragging about his talents, and when he started complaining, typical Julius, he was either telling everyone he was better than they were, or he was trying to blame his problem on someone else. Too often, Reed had been the receiving end of the blame, along with the physical bullying that came with it. You need to ignore him, Shelley said. As if, Reed hissed. He's the world's biggest. Did you have something to add to Julia's observations? Mrs. Billings asked Reed. Mrs. Billings was a perfect teacher for this class, small and compact. A plain face, generally devoid of emotion, the head of a robotics class moved in jerky, precise movements that had sparked more than one conversation about whether she was an advanced robot herself. The first week of class, Shelley's twin brother and Reed's other best friend, Pickle, was posited. Who better to teach robotics than AI? Pickle was convinced Miss Billings was an android. For weeks, he had been devising a plan to prove his hypothesis, because so far the plan involved cutting into Mrs. Billings. Shelley wouldn't let Pickle go forward with it. So, what was the other teacher's pale skin was still a mystery. Reed tipped his chair forward and sat up straight on his desk. In response to Miss Billings' question, he said, no. Reed wouldn't add to Julius's observation because he hadn't heard him. All he heard was when Julius talked was a jerk's loud, nasally twang. Julius never said anything you wanted to hear anyway. He only spoke in insults, complaints, or brags. Miss Billings left her cool-eyed gaze on Reed long enough for him to start squirming before she shifted her attention back to the class and the whole. She flipped her long, wavy blonde hair as a shoulder as she spoke. So let's talk about Julius's concern. What would Dilbert do to prevent this remote from affecting Julius's exosuit? Reed knew that the class discussion is going to be research of IR versus RF remotes, and since it was bored him the first time, he didn't want to listen to it a second time. Besides, it wouldn't matter how much he listened. At this point in the semester, he knew that he was going to crash and burn the project in spite of whatever he'd learned or didn't learn. Reed looked to the mid-size, partially constructed exoskeleton sitting on the desk. He'd been working on it since Miss Billings assigned their spring semester project, but it looked as if he'd started because he seemed to have missed too much pertinent information in their class lectures. He tried to use the textbook to help him fill the blanks, but he didn't completely understand it. When Miss Billings had first introduced the concept of exoskeletons, he had defined them as crude frames that could be attached to other things or added mobility. She'd been explained that she could expand upon the frame's power source and add enough functionality to control the wearer. That's what had been his great project idea. He intended to make something fit over his little sister Alexa's extremely annoying baby doll. He thought it'd be cool to make a little doll to scare his sister. A classic brotherly prank, but this vision at this point was likely to become a reality. Shelley and Pickle got their projects over halfway done before Reed had gotten to their 10th of the way through his. And now they were both finished a couple weeks before the project was due. Admittedly, Pickle's robot was puny, about the size of a small remote-controlled car, just vaguely man-shaped, small metal skeleton, not a lot of personality. Pickle's robot wasn't much to look at, but his robot had mad abilities, which had tricked out custom remote. He would practically make a thing breakdance. Shelley's robot was similar, but dog-shaped instead of man-shaped. It was about the size of her Labrador, Thales, who, named after some man Shelley has the first scientist, living between 624 BC and 545 BC. Thales of Miletus was an ancient Greek dude who did a lot of science and mathematics stuff. Reed could remember the guy's name when he lived, but for some reason he couldn't remember anything Shelley had said the guy did. Not that any of it mattered. What mattered was that Shelley's robot was supposed to mimic a well-behaved dog, and from what Reed could tell, she would probably win the dog show with the thing. He was going to get an A, like she always did. Why did he let the twins talk him into this class anyway? Sure, they were his best friends, but they didn't make him a science nerd like them. Reed was into computers, but not as they related to robots. He wanted to combine his love for fiction and his attitude for programming to become a game designer. He wasn't an engineer. And he sucked at building things. Shelley and Pickle knew this. After all, Shelley was the one who wouldn't let a year go by without reminding him of the complete ineptitude going all the way back to the building blocks they used to play with when they were 5 years old. They're freshmen now, and yet Shelley got the giggles at every science model and tutorial event diorama assigned to them. Every one of Reed's construction efforts reminded her of the log cabin 5-year-old Reed had built. The cabin looked less like a cabin and more like the aftermath of an explosion. But in spite of what the good-natured ribbing, he knew Shelley hadn't talked him into this class, so she would laugh at him. As for Pickle, she was too uninterested in others' shortcomings to orchestrate Reed's humiliation. It's fun when we take classes together, Shelley said to Reed when he signed up. Pickle had grunted when he argued for non-committal disinterest. The truth was Reed would do pretty much anything Shelley wanted to do. They were friends and they'd been friends for too long for her to think of him as anything but a friend. But he spent more time than he ever admitted thinking about what it would be like if she and Shelley were more than friends. But after almost 10 years, the idea still had his dad would call the castle in the sky. But maybe it wasn't. Sometimes when he talked to Shelley, she looked at him with something of admiration, as if he was considering him in a different light. Take a cliche castle in the sky, for instance. One day when Reed and Pickle and Shelley were going off the bus, Shelley was talking about wanting something that was impossible. Reed had spotted clouds that looked exactly like a castle. He pointed at the castle-scape tower and said to Shelley, "Look, a castle in the sky. That means impossible dreams can happen, even if it's in another dimension." He was messing around, but Shelley said, "Actually, you're right." And then she squinted at him and suddenly gotten interesting. Reed looked over to Shelley now, her attention on Mrs. Billings. Shelley was chewing on the ends of her thick black hair. She wore a meticulous thin chin-length style, which put the ends right at the mouth level. She always chewed on her hair when she was concentrating. It was one of the little imperfections he noticed about her, and all other imperfection, it was hopelessly charming. Nah, he didn't think Shelley and Pickle wanted him to humiliate himself for their amusement. That was mean. And they weren't mean. Maybe they were a little thoughtless sometimes, but they weren't wrapped up in their books and projects and forget and act like normal kids, but they weren't mean. Now Julius, he was mean. Reed shot out a dirty look at the artful blonde waves cascading down the back of Julius's head. Shelley once told Reed that Julius's hair was dreamy, even though he admitted it was personality. It was somewhere between detestable and execrable. The latter word, among others, taught Reed to never again buy her a word of the day calendar for her birthday. "Why does he have to use the RF remote?" Julius whined to Miss Billings. "I don't want this stupid remote to be telling my exoskeleton what to do." "My ears," Reed thought. When Julius whined, his voice climbed an octave, and when he sounded like a frightened weasel with a head cold. Who cared about the dreamy hair? It makes me gag, Reed thought. And who cared about Julius was tall and muscular, and shadow girls who rated boys on looks or for money instead of character thought he was a stud. Julius's voice told listeners everything they needed to know about him. He was a sniveling weasel who acted like an ass to people who wouldn't notice the sniveling weaselness. All expensive clothes Julius wore didn't cover his essential weasel identity either. No amount of skinny black jeans, gazillion-dollar basketball shoes, designer shirts, and cashmere scarves would disguise the true weasel. Reed looked at the dangling metal foot from Julius's gangly exoskeleton and hung off the right side of Julius' desk. Julius' project was a skeletal suit he intended to wear, a collection of metal frameworks attached to mechanical joints at the shoulders, elbows, hips, and knees. Julius' exosuit had leather straps and metal clamps that would hold a contraption in place on Julius' body. He'd been bragging about it would make him even faster and stronger than he already was. Whatever. Reed thought of the exosuits looked like a little scaffolding that raced the tiny people might create attached to the human body so they would climb up and repair it. Reed wished Julius' suit as scaffolding were a race for tiny people who would just fix Julius, who would certainly need it in repair. "Dilbert?" Miss Billings asked. Pickle looked up. His name was Dilbert, but his family and close friends called him Pickle, a play on Dill. "Can you explain the cost of your reasoning for using an RF remote?" "Sure, but I'm not going to be using an RF remote. I'm using the RF as an IR extender. I want my remote to be effective through walls," Pickle sniffed. "I don't think the problem is my remote anyway. I've achieved my goal with my remote. If he hasn't achieved his goal, isn't it up to him to make adjustments? Why doesn't he," Pickle pointed at Julius, "install an RFI filter on the signal patch? Or he can change his frequency. Or he can check his macros. He may have them programmed too close to mine." Pickle sniffed again. He didn't have a cold, he was just a perpetual sniffer. Short and dark like his twin sister. Pickle unfortunately didn't get his sister's looks. Shelley was pretty. It was just that no one other than Reed seemed to notice it because she was so intense. Or maybe it was that baggy button-down shirt she always wore in her jeans. Pickle, on the other hand, he had never been called pretty. With unusually deep-set eyes and nearly black unibrow and a long nose, his strangely small mouth filled with crooked teeth. Pickle's looks weren't going to open doors for him. He was going to have to rely on his smarts to get him through life. Thankfully, he had plenty to choose of those. Pickle narrowed his eyes to Julius and delivered a killing blow. "He might even have stolen my macros." "I did not," Julius interrupted. His sound came out as cross being a honk and a screech. Miss Billings pushed a button on her own remote. A remote that controlled at least a dozen robotic creations in the room. Robotic arms attached to a monkey holding symbols flung the symbols out and smashed them together. A metallic clang rang and hushed in the classroom. Julius crossed his arms and skulked. but he didn't whine anymore. Everyone else was still. After 5 seconds, Miss Billings was calmly in her flat, even tone. Dilbert makes an excellent point, Julius. I suggest you attempt to implement some modification strategies of your own. Successful robotics aren't about getting others to make changes so your creation functions properly. We will live in a world filled with RF signals. We're going to have to problem solve the issue using techniques and knowledge you still learned in this class. Reed grinned to Julius's red ears. Smackdown, ha! Reed looked down in the room and see if anyone else was enjoying Julius's embarrassment as much as he was. His gaze landed on Leah, a curvy girl with round glasses from Reed had admired for much of a year. No one ever wanted to talk to her, but her happy demeanor and self-confidence was unshakable. Leah noticed Reed's gaze and winked at him. Whether or not the wink was shared enjoyment of Julius's discomfort was unclear, but Reed smiled at her anyway. The rest of the 15 kids in the class didn't look toward either Julius or Reed. They were all either fiddling with their projects or looking at Miss Billings' figures. This class was exactly a cross-section of the normal freshmen, except for Julius, who was an odd combination of jock, brain, and bully. Everyone else in the room had been in the running for Geek of the Year, if there was such a contest. There were more glasses, bad haircuts, and mismatched clothes in this room than the rest of the school combined. Robotics class might as well have been called Misfits class. Now, Miss Billings said, if there are any other questions or complaints. No one said a word, no one moved. Good. Miss Billings stood and stepped over the blackboard. Let's move on to deeper discussion of actuators. I understand some of you are having problems there. So what are your 4 common types we talked about last week? Shelley's hand shot up. Reed suppressed a grin. Shelley had never been a question she couldn't answer, and for some reason she always enjoyed seeing her small square hand as bitten into a numb fingernail stuck up in the air, vibrating with eagerness. Her excitement was audible through the beaded bracelets that she liked to wear. They clacked together when she waited for Miss Billings to call on her. Yes, Shelley? Electric motors, solenoids, hydraulic systems, and pneumatic systems. Excellent. While she wrote Shelley's answer on the blackboard with her right hand, Miss Billings pressed another button of remote in her left hand. A small spider-shaped skeleton crawled up inside the wall across him and stuck a light bulb-shaped sticker on the row next to Shelley's name, which was on a huge chart that collected all the class's name. Shelley had more stickers than anyone else. Reed had none. Reed turned away on the stupid chart and looked out the window at the tiny pale green buds on the oak trees outside the school. He wondered if he could go to the buds get bigger if he stared at them long enough. Watching trees go, that would be more interesting than this stuff. One of Mrs. Billings' robotic characters started marching up and down each row between the desks. An exoskeleton was vaguely shaped like a horse. Its hoof feet clapped against the gray linoleum floor as it pranced past Reed's dirty athletic shoes. Reed was pretty sure the robot was modeling an example of hydraulic actuator, but maybe it was a pneumatic. He probably shouldn't have been paying more attention. How did Mrs. Billings accept anyone to pay attention when this room full of animated characters, exoskeleton, and robotic parts? It was a sensory overload, like having a class in a circus. On top of that, even though Miss Billings wore conservative pantsuits, she obviously loved the color red. She splashed all over the school's institutional pale window walls and formed huge horses and myriad charts. It was distracted. A wadded up piece of paper lay on Reed's desk. Next to the pathetic skeleton, he blinked and glanced at Mrs. Billings, who had been back of the class. So as he spread out a paper, it was a note from Shelley. Coming home with us? Long homework session, followed by a smiley face. Shelley thought long homework sessions were fun. She looked at Shelley, and she was watching Miss Billings, but she nodded when Reed gave her a thumbs up. Not what he wanted to do homework, but she did want to go home with his friends, and besides, he had to do homework. At least he studied with Shelley and Pickle, he got better grades. As soon as Mrs. Billings dismissed the class, Pickle grabbed his robot and jumped up. He ate his every day because this was the last class before lunch. Pickle loved to eat, and he was the only other thing he'd been going for him. Pickle ate more than Shelley and Reed combined, and he didn't have much more meat on him than his metal skeleton robot did. The boy had a metabolism of a hummingbird. Today, Pickle was even bigger hurry. Today was half day because of the teachers had some conference to go to. After school activities had been canceled. There would be no late buses. The principal had announced in the morning that the school would be closed up and locked at noon. This meant Pickle and, of course, Shelley and Reed were in an afternoon of great snacks Mrs. Jared put out for the twins and their little brother. Ori on special days like this, even normal days like the homemade pizzas, veggie egg rolls, and grilled sandwiches are typical after-school eats for the Jared house. But on special days, Miss Jared went over the top. Pickle, Shelley, and their little brother, Ori, were beyond lucky. Their mom was home to make them a lot of food this afternoon, other great meal later on the evening. Reed was lucky if he could scrounge up a few pretzels, he'd go home in his empty house. Luckily, he usually got home when the twins. If he didn't, he would have been skinnier than he was. Pickle started trotting up the aisle toward the door, and Reed picked up the project and tried to figure out how to shove it into his backpack. He didn't take his eyes off of Pickle as he folded and refolded Project's robotic arms, and he saw when Julius stuck out his foot and tripped Pickle. Pickle, who wasn't the most coordinated kid anyway, lost balance and flew forward the best in front of Julius. Pickle's big nose led the way whether his face went, and so his nose got burnt in the impact when it hit the corner of the desk. Blood spurted from Pickle's nostrils as Julius snorted a high-pitched laugh. Miss Billings, who had been gathering a stack of books and preparing to leave the room, didn't see a thing. Neither did anyone else. Everyone was too focused on where they were going. Even Shelley had her head down and collapsed her dog-sized exoskeleton in a puppy-sized one. It was a particularly clever part of her project, Reed thought. He told him he would figure out how to downsize Thales too, without hurting him, of course. He'd patent collapsible dogs and become a billionaire. Reed's muscles bunched as he watched his friend try to stop the spurting blood from one hand. Reed wanted to help Pickle and he wanted to confront Julius, but he knew it wouldn't lead him and put himself in the middle. As if reading Reed's mind, Julius turned and smiled. Julius' usually pointed canine teeth seemed to gleam under his classroom's fluorescent lighting. Not for this time. Reed fantasized that Julius was a vampire who had been vaporized by a stake through the heart. If Julius had a heart. Reed clenched his fist as Pickle ran through the room, clutching his robot in one hand and his blood nose in the other. Before Reed could tell Shelley what just happened, he got her to gag again and hurried Pickle, calling, "Pickle, wait up!" Julius gave Reed an evil eye for another few seconds, then turned to gather his floppy exoskeleton. All the other kids filed out of the room. Reed lingered. He wanted to say something to Julius. Was it Shelley that called Julius the other day when they were talking about him? Oh yeah, she wanted an anonymous, odious reprobate. Reed mentally repeated the words when he found ridiculous. Only Shelley would get away with saying something like that. "What are you staring at?" Julius asked Reed. Reed looked around. He realized that he and Julius were alone in the room. He hated his palms that started sweating. His breathing became faster. Why did he let Julius get to him? Julius stopped trying to get another suit. Instead, he carefully laid it out. He grinned at Reed. "Bet you wish you could build something like this, huh, moron?" Reed didn't answer. He wanted to pick up his backpack and leave, but something kept him in the room. What? He didn't know. It was sure the company, which sucked, and the decor, which he found intimidating, wasn't the smell, which was a cross between shock and smoldering. "I didn't know what you're doing in this class," Julius sneered. "I mean, your runty little friend may be a mini freak, but at least he had a few brain cells. And your other friend, a weird hair-chewing chick, an uppity cow. What with the little makeup, she wouldn't be bad to look at, and with brain cells too. You've got nothing going for you. You're a freak and nothing can make you worth looking at. And on top of that, you're all air up there, aren't you?" Julius leaned forward and flicked a finger at Reed's eyes. Reed tightened his fist and Julius noticed. "What are you going to do? Hit me? Didn't you know that what I did to your pickle friend?" Julius laughed his beyond annoying laugh. "I didn't even have to lift a finger. I just moved my foot, and now he's a bloody nose. I just think of what I could do to you without giving it much effort." Reed swallowed. Julius just called Reed an ugly, stupid freak, and yet Reed was still standing there as if he couldn't talk. Reed hated being called a freak, and he hated being called ugly. Yeah, Reed was a bit of an outcast, and his mom had died, and he hadn't been the point of trying to get along with anyone. He separated himself with his friends, using his overwhelming grief as a fence to erect a barrier between himself and the world. Only Pickle and Shelley had bothered to climb the fence. And no, Reed wasn't much to look at. The truth was, he was not unlike Pickle in the looks department. Skinny with unusually long arms, his pronounced brow ridge and jutting jaw gave him more of an ape-like appearance than he wanted to admit. More than once, Joey called him monkey face when he was younger. Now his dad had let him grow out his curly brown hair long. He was able to disguise his primate features a little. If only he had an ape's strength. He still wanted to say something to Julius. No, forget saying something. He wanted to do something, but he couldn't. Why did he think things would go any different in high school than he'd been in grade school? Julius lifted his exoskeleton. "See? This here? I was going to use it to be stronger and faster. I don't need to be stronger and faster. I'm already strong and fast. I figured out a better use. I'm going to get this thing working perfectly. I'm going to hold you down and put you into it. Then I'll control the exoskeleton and make you do whatever I command it to do. You'll have to be my servant, and I'm going to make you wait for me all day long. You'll carry my books, tie my shoes, get me my food, clean up after me. I'm going to make you dance for me. What do you think about that, loser? Would you like to dance like a monkey for me?" Reed still didn't speak. He, like he'd been turned into stone. All he could do was stand there and watch Julius lean over and tinker with the exoskeleton. Julius looked up and laughed at Reed. Got your tongue?" Julius lifted his exoskeleton. "Want to see it in action? It's pretty amazing if I do say so myself." Julius began fitting his suit into his long legs and V-shaped torso. The metal shell lay over Julius's limbs. The shoulder strap, chest strap, and hip strap, along with the clamps on the wrists and ankles, kept everything in place. Reed, biting the inside of his cheek hard enough to draw blood, remained spirited in the spot, watching. Outside the room, students laughed and called to each other as they headed to the buses lined out of the school. Inside the classroom, it was nearly silent, except for the chicks and snaps of Julius fitting himself in a robotic suit. "See here?" Julius held up his arm. He indicated the wrist and he pointed his ankles. "I've equipped the exoskeleton with locking mechanism, so once I get you in it, I can keep you in it." Reed watched Julius struggle for some joints of the exoskeleton. Julius shifted his framework on his body and then adjusted the suit's piston cylinders. Outside, a couple buses started their engines and a baritone rumbling vibrated the walls of the school. If Reed didn't leave soon, he would have to walk to Jared's house. He'd have to walk over 7 miles, all because he stood there paralyzed and mute for the last several minutes. He shook his head and tried to figure out his brain rebooted. Julius, heavy with the exoskeleton riding his body, leaned down and fiddled with the wires between the skeleton circuits. Reed wished he had the guts to watch out, shoved Julius across this room, him and his stupid exoskeleton. But it wasn't good thing he didn't. A second later, Reed was glad he didn't touching Julius. A radiant flash burst up like fireworks as power surge sparked the exoskeleton. Julius' body twitched. His eyes widened as he went rigid for several seconds. In those seconds, Reed's mind bizarrely thought of the previous day's word of the day. Sherry shared every one of them with him. He forgot most of them, but he remembered flugurant, which means flashing like lightning. The power surge was flugurant, he thought. With curiosity been happening next, Reed watched his stiffness leave Julius' body. Julius wavered his feet, lost his balance, and fell back at the desk, shaking his head. He grubbed his hair and slid into it. He put his head down. For what felt like long 20 seconds, Julius was perfectly still. Was he alive? Reed blinked and studied Julius' inert form. When Reed's gaze landed on the wrists and ankle joints in the suit, finally Reed moved. Stepping over Julius, Reed quickly locked the wrist and ankle joints. They fitted together in a satisfying snick. As soon as they did, Reed stepped back and grinned. When he teach a noxious, odious reprobate, Reed picked up his backpack and slung it over his shoulder. He watched Julius open his eyes. It took him a second before he oriented. When he did, he attempted to strip off the exoskeleton. Oops, Reed said. He backed out of the classroom door. He finally found his voice. I must have locked you in. My bad. Julius jerked his arms, yanking free from the restraints of the skeletal suit, kicked his leg with his right hand, and grabbed the exoskeleton, hugging his left hand. He grunted and strained. The exoskeleton wouldn't budge. What the hell did you do, punk? Julius yelled. Unlock me. I don't think so. Do what I tell you. Unlock me. Julius' face was a molten mix of red and purple. His eyes looked like they were bulging out of his head. Spittle clung to the corner of his mouth. Reed shrugged and grinned. He wouldn't remember the last time he was so pleased with himself. Not that he thought, though, he was going to the point where he was done. But he's messing with Julius was going to leave Julius in a suit overnight. Could he do that? Why not? Even trouble was why not. Julius would tell the teachers what Reed did, but all Reed did would have to do is deny it. If he made sure Julius was unlocked by morning, why would anyone suspect Reed of anything? Everyone knew he was pretty much a wuss. No one would believe he was encouraged to do this. Unlock me, Julius commanded again. His muscles and neck stood out like cords. His jaw started, and he kept opening and closing his fists. At this point, Reed usually really had no choice but to leave Julius there all night. If he let Julius out now, Julius was going to beat the crap out of him. If he unlocked Julius and ran, Reed probably would not run the guy. Julius was crazy fast, and Reed was an athletic spaz. If he waited until morning, there would be enough people around that Julius wouldn't touch him. The decision basically made itself. Julius was going to be locked overnight. The idea of buoyed Reed so much, he felt like he was floating. I'm going to do you a favor, Reed said, happy to have something clever to say. I'm going to leave you here in your suit overnight so you can get an idea what it feels like to have someone treat you the way you like to treat everyone else. Maybe a robot can teach you a thing or two. Hey, Julius tried to get up, but his exoskeleton was contracted and stiff. It was acting in a full body cast, keeping Julius' body locked in a seated position. Have fun, Reed called. He sprinted from the room. Before he left the classroom, he shut off the lights. Get back here, you stupid ape, Julius screamed. Do you know what you've done? I'm going to kill you. The last few words came out nearly unintelligible screech as Reed pulled the door closed. Julius began bellowing. I'm going to rip your head off and flush it down the toilet. I'm going to tear you apart limb from limb. Get back here and unlock this. Reed laughed, and for some reason Julius' threats, which normally would have reduced Reed to a quivering jelly, found it sounded funny. For once, Julius had no power Reed had at all. Reed looked around the empty hallway. He was alone. Good. This whole thing was probably empty now. An auxiliary hall near the back of the school. It wasn't the outside of the class hours. No one would find Julius even if he yelled his head off. Come back here and let me out of this thing, Julius screamed. You can't leave me here like this. Reed grinned. He turned and ran to the school, hoping he wasn't too late to catch the bus. Because Mr. Jansen, the bus driver, had always been looking out for him, Reed didn't miss the bus. He made a total fool of himself, waving his arm around and shouting as Mr. Jansen started to pull away from the curb, but he got the driver's attention. Mr. Jansen stopped the bus a few feet from the curb and opened up the bus's doors. The driver of one of the buses farther down the row behind Reed's bus honked. Stumbling up the stairs under the bus, Reed gasped, thanks to Mr. Johnson, who shook his gray-haired head and winked at Reed. Cutting it close, my boy. Cutting it close. Reed sucked in some air. Sorry. Life happens, Mr. Jansen said. We adjust. We smiled at Reed. Take your seat. Reed scanned the interior of the bus. One of the cheerleaders gave him a disgusted look. Reed ignored her and looked for Shelley and Pickle. He knew they'd be back on the bus, and he knew to save them a seat. Keeping gaze on his feet in the aisle scuffed rubber flooring, and Reed hurried to his friends. He slid next to Pickle. As soon as Reed's butt hit the hard maroon vinyl seat, Mr. Jansen released the brakes. The bus hissed, hurched, rumbled away from the school. Reed looked at Pickle's nose. It was hard not to. Red but swollen, smeared with blood. Pickle's nose was more prominent than ever. Now he had a little white tissue roll sticking out of each nostril. Given that the nose was peaky, Pickle looked like a big bird sucking up white worms. Does it hurt? Reed asked. Pickle, as usual, was doing some type of numbers puzzle. He glanced over at Reed. Huh? Reed pointed at his nose. Pickle made a funny cross-eyed face in an attempt to look at the injured beak. Reed suppressed a smile. Pickle shrugged. Yeah, not the first time, though. I can ignore it. Sorry. Why? What did you do? Nothing. Pickle returned to his puzzle. Reed glanced at Shelley. She was reading, also as usual. The glass smelled diesel exhaust, sweat, peanuts, and bubblegum. His engine sounded like the content snore of a sleeping dragon. The sound helped tension and adrenaline drain from Reed's system. The bus gained speed and turned out the school's driveway onto the road. Reed looked out the window. The high school was tucked in the back of an older neighborhood, so the first few blocks that they left the school were big trees and pretty big green lawns. Reed usually liked looking at the greenery. He would stare at the lawns with envy. His front yard was mostly dirt. Today, Reed wasn't really seeing anything he was looking at. He was back in the robotics classroom with Julius. His mind was focused on Julius, locked into his exoskeleton, Julius' face nearly purple with rage. In the Dark Ages, Shelley said, hash torture was commonly used to punish those who broke the law. Reed flinched. What? He turned to stare at Shelley. As always, she sat back behind Pickle and Reed. Her massive backpack with extra book bag took up the rest of the seat. Did she know what he'd done? Her attention on the book, Shelley continued. When someone violated civil law, torture would be done to the town square. Public display was the consequences for lawlessness thought to be a deterrent. Oh, she was reading. Of course she was. She loved to share what she was learning, and often read aloud on the bus and at home and at lunch and in the hallways at school. She read pretty much everywhere. Today she was reading her history homework. Shelley was an AP World History because she read so many history books outside of school that she was beyond the normal history curriculum. She wasn't just a science geek, she was an information geek. Reed relaxed his shoulders, returned his attention to the window. When they left behind the neighborhood, the bus route ran along the main drag lined up the strip malls and car dealerships. Reed liked this stretch too, because he enjoying the cars. He liked to imagine himself driving them, and he picked a different make and model every day. Concentrating, he put himself in the wheel of a bright yellow Mustang. Shelley's voice, however, ruined his fancy. Torture was very creative in the Middle Ages, Shelley read. They came up with truly morbid ways of inflicting excruciating pain. The Judas cradle, for example, impaled a seated victim for several days, which blood-curdling names like the Beast Ripper and the Pear of Anguish. Medieval torture devices were a testament to human ingenuity. Torture. Was what I did to Julius torture? Reed's chest tightened. Yeah, it probably was, being stuck in at least a mild form of torture, especially in the exoskeleton with no way to move or eat or drink or get to the bathroom. It was a Judas cradle, but it wasn't nice either. After the malls and car lots, their bus route wound through the industrial park. When it passed a farm before returning to the newer subdivision. Most of the bus stops were the subdivision was stuffed full of houses that, though good size, mostly looked alike. Reed didn't care about the houses, so he stopped registering individual things, so he just saw blurs of color. And Julius stuck in that metal framework. Reed's dad, who did the best he could to be a single dad to Reed and his sister, Alexa, was fond of saying that you shouldn't solve a problem at the level of the problem. Reed wasn't a genius like his friends, but he was smart enough to know it meant lowering himself to the level of Julius' meanness wasn't the way to handle the jerk. But still, after Julius did the pickle, wasn't that justification enough to lock Julius into an exoskeleton he was so proud of? And what was it Julius did to Reed about locking Reed into his exoskeleton? Didn't Julius deserve to get a taste of his own medicine? Reed started unwinding his muscles again. Yeah, what he did wasn't so bad, it was justice. He bus went through the pothole and everyone popped out the seats in a nanosecond. When they all landed again, Shelley poked Reed's shoulder. He turned and looked at her. Listen to this, she said. You won't believe this. What? Reed said. Pickle said nothing. He kept linking in the answers to his puzzle. One of the most commonly used forms of torture was called the wheel. Shelley read from her thick, musty-smelling book. Those condemned to being constrained in this way had prolonged torture ahead of them. They were held in place, unable to free themselves. Reed stared at Shelley. What was she doing? Was she messing with him? Held in place, unable to free themselves? It sounded like she was talking about Julius. Maybe she knew what he'd done after all, but how? It was sometimes called the breaking wheel, Shelley read on. Reed blew out air. No, she didn't know what she was doing. The coincidence that he was reading about torture devices. They called it that, she continued, because they were used to crush the bones of the condemned. Ew, huh? Shelley looked at Reed with wide eyes. Then she turned to gaze at the book and read on. The device was designed to torture the lasting over multiple days. The wheel was made up of many radical spokes, and a person subjected to the ties of the whole wheel before the club or cudgel was used to beat their limbs. This process reduced the human to being a mutilated bag of bones, and an onlooker described it as writhing, mourning monster with bloody tentacles. That's gross, Pickle said without looking at his puzzle. Totally, Reed agreed. He didn't try not to think about what Julius was experiencing now. But hey, at least Julius wasn't tied to a medieval torture device, right? Julius was restrained, and as time passed, he'd be uncomfortable. And he wasn't in any pain. No one was standing over and beating him with a cudgel, whatever that was. And he was just trapped. Shelley continued to read about medieval torture, but Reed turned her out. He turned back toward the window in the bus that stopped at the corner. He watched the mom holding hands with a little kid who had a red balloon. The balloon bobbed in the air, following the little kid's movements because it was tied to the kid's wrist. Reed thought of the Julius' big wrist, Maybe he would go back to school and unlock the exoskeleton after their study session this evening. A few hours would be enough to punish Julius for his nastiness. That way Julius would learn his lesson, but Reed wouldn't stop at the level of torture. Yeah, that was what Reed would do. Except how would he get away from Julius before Julius tried to kill him? Reed chewed his lower lip. He sat up straight and smiled. He knew he just could do. He unlocked one of Julius's hands, then jumped back and run before Julius could grab him. Julius, stiff in confinement, would have to take at least half a minute to unlock his wrists and ankles, and in that time Reed would be far enough away to hide. Once Julius was gone, Reed would go home. And after that, well, he'd deal with that when the time came. But until then, he was going to get some good food at Gerard's house and hang out with his friends. He was going to put Julius out of his mind and enjoy the rest of free time that day. He deserved it. Just like Julius deserved what was happening to him. Reed loved his dad, and he knew his dad did everything he could to give Reed and Lexa a good home. But his dad was, well, his dad. He knew what nothing about a good home was. He couldn't cook, he couldn't clean. He thought decoration was a calendar with fish photos on it with a few sports team schedules. When Reed was home, he never really felt at home, not like he did here at the Gerard house. Reed sprawled on his thick, softer gray rug in front of the stone hearth. A slow-burning fire sputtered in the grate. Thiles, exhausted from a rousing game of chase the tennis ball, was now stretched out on the cool tiles of the nearby entryway, adding the satisfied snores of the flame staccato popping. The sounds were both rhythmic and soothing. Reed's belly was full of spicy chicken wings, jalapeno poppers, potato skids, homemade pot pie, and chocolate chip cookies. He was so relaxed he wished he would take a nap. You kids have everything you need before I head to my class? Miss Gerard asked. She took an hard way between the family room and the entryway, tugging on a floppy yellow rain hat. Reed turned to look over his shoulder, though out the French doors of Gerard's heavily treed backyard. Yep, it was raining, a steady but light spring rain. The sky looked shiny and pink with the twilight. Reed craned his neck in to see the western horizon. He liked looking at the sun when it was getting ready to nighttime. Tonight, the sun was a fuzzy, bright orange tinge of purple. He looked back at Miss Gerard. Thanks for the snacks and for the dinner, too. Miss Gerard smiled and tucked her shoulder-length dark hair under the rain hat. She shrugged her short, plump body into her slicker and said, "You're welcome, as always, Reed. We love having you here." She snapped her slicker closed and closed at her own kids, who were all obvious in her impending departure. Shelley, reclining her overstuffed navy blue sofa at her nose, buried in some thick history book she'd been reading on the bus. Mikko sat across the leg in the lad's blue tweed recliner, bending so low over his own book it looked like he was trying to dive into it. Reed couldn't see what Pickle was reading. The third Gerard kid, 6-year-old Ori, had been playing video game, but now he was picking up a remote for Pickle's robot skeleton. "Kids," Miss Gerard yelled. All three of the children looked up. Miss Gerard shook up their head and smiled. "I'm leaving. You kids behave, and Pickle, ice that nose again in an hour or so." "Huh?" Pickle said. Miss Gerard shook her head. "I'll remind him," Reed said. Pickle's nose was looking much better, particularly Miss Gerard's matter-of-factly treated Pickle's nose the second they got home. Examining it, she declared it bruised, not broken. She cleaned it up, applied some kind of herbal cream, and then given Pickle an ice pack and balanced it on his face. Pickle resisted that he couldn't eat or read with the pack on his nose, but he didn't have to leave it on for long. Soon, he was eating snacks along with everyone else, and he declared the double chocolate cookies Miss Gerard brought out after dinner healing cookies, because his nose stopped hurting after he ate them. Now, after studying her beaky son for a second, Miss Gerard looking at Reed. "What would you have do without you, Reed?" Miss Gerard smiled at them and then turned back to their kids. "Bye, kids." "Love you, Mom," Shelley said. "Bye," Pickle and Ori said in unison. "Thanks again, Miss Gerard." "Bye," Reed said. "Bye, all," Miss Gerard said. "Come on, Thiles." Thiles was already on his feet. Standing next to Miss Gerard's leg, his tail whipped as fast as slapping her thigh. Miss Gerard's class was his class too, and he was learning to be a therapy dog. Miss Gerard thought not the source of her children's brilliance was no brain slosh. She went all sorts of classes. She seemed to have a lot of interest, and she always joined the conversation with her kids or babbling about their homework or projects. But the Gerard's brains came mostly from Mr. Gerard. He was a retired electrical engineer who did counseling for the big companies. He traveled a lot. He was gone now, but when he was here, he was a hands-on dad. He was cool. Shelley and Pickle had returned to their books before the front door shut behind Miss Gerard. Only pressed a button in remote control, and Pickle's robot skeleton stood up and slid before a few inches, or his eyes lit up. Or was a conglomeration of his siblings, which made him not as cute as Shelley, but much cuter than Pickle. His face still round and a little pudgy. Ori still had Shelley's large eyes and long lashes and full mouth. He had his brother's nose. On Ori, the big nose was more amusing than ugly. He looked a little like a baby bird. 6 years old. All could rock a look like that. Ori wouldn't have to worry about looks for a while. Ori bent over the remote, so intent that he nearly touched him with his long nose. Little robot skeleton scooted forward some more. Ori laughed. Reed glanced at Pickle. Pickle either didn't know the brother was playing with the project or he didn't care. Probably if Ori damaged the thing in a way, Pickle could easily fix it. Reed looked at his own pathetic project. He was supposed to be working on it. He had been sort of off and on all afternoon. He hadn't made much progress, though. Reed had chosen an electric motor in his actuator because his dad knew how to build a motor and was excited to help him. The part of the project, along with the connecting battery-powered motor exoskeleton circuitry, was done okay. But the problem Reed had now was the skeleton structure. As always, he would visualize how to construct the form. Every time he attached a new metal component to the skeleton, he ended up with something that stuck out at a natural angle. And then he turned it into making it fit. The joint didn't work properly. Right now, the exoskeleton looked mangled and backward. That wasn't good. Reed sighed and gazed at the cozy room. Even though the Gerard family room was big and had high ceilings, it was warm and inviting. Kind of like a cocoon filled with comfortable soft furniture. A couple tables, multiple shelves stuffed with books and games, colorful art and tidy play area for Ori, a big microfiber covered bed for Thals in the fireplace, and a huge TV movie night of the radio games. The room was perfect for hanging out. It wasn't so bad for doing homework either. You might have been well comfortable while you're doing something you didn't want to do. The week before, the family room got an addition that intrigued Reed. It was a miniature house, a replica of the Gerard home, standing at about 3 feet tall and stretching out about 4 feet wide. The house required the removal of one ottoman in the room, but otherwise it would fit just fine. Mr. Gerard built the house for Shelley when she was decorating to look exactly like the family's real house. Do you want me to help you with that? Pickle asked. Huh? Reed looked over at his friend. Pickle marked his book, which Reed would know was in advanced engineering mathematics. You sighed. Pickle said, and your exoskeleton looks like it's being built by a blind man without opposite thumbs. I wondered if you wanted some help. Reed threw a gear at Pickle. Pickle didn't mean to be mean. He was brilliant in his own matter-of-fact kind of way. Well, I was sorry he was okay to hang out with, even though he was super smart. Pickle never made Reed feel dumb. When he made a comment like that one, Reed knew Pickle wasn't making fun of him. Pickle was just making an observation. I'll muddle, though, thank you. I'll muddle through, thank you. You might try angling the joints to the left and right limbs move on the same, or at least similar ways, unless you're building an alien exoskeleton. Thank you, Mr. Obvious, Reed said. He made a face. Maybe I am building an alien exoskeleton. Cool. Pickle shrugged and turned to his book. Shelley looked up from hers. What? Reed laughed. My exoskeleton is an alien. Shelley rolled her eyes and returned to reading. Ori laughed. Reed turned to see if the kid was laughing at Reed. He wasn't. He was forwardly focused on the robot's remote. Pickle, robotic skeleton, plowed through the hearth with a loud crunch. Pickle didn't look up from his book. Ori back to the 7-inch skeleton started spinning in a circle. Reed began to consider Pickle's offer. He was pretty sure Pickle had built the little robotic skeleton in a day. Maybe he could help Reed salvage his project. Seriously, look at the thing move, Reed thought. He shook his head and the little robotic skeleton was whipped in tight circles. He sucked in his breath and sat up. How could he have forgotten what happened in class today? Well, to be fair, a lot have happened since class. The confrontation with Julius, along with Reed's resulting uncharacteristic bursts of nerve, and pretty much acted like a brain wipe for the rest of the day. All Reed could do was think about Julius locked in an exoskeleton. But now he remembered, Julius has been complaining about Pickle's remote was affecting Julian's exoskeleton, and Julius was now locked in that metal frame. His body inextricably linked to the structure, and therefore inextricably linked to his movement. What if it could crash into something in the way Pickle's robot had crashed into the hearth? What if it was spinning in circles right now? Hey, Pickle, Reed kept his gaze on the gyrating metal skeleton. Huh? Pickle looked at Reed. That thing. Reed pointed at the remote or his small hands. Does that thing have much range, right? Pickle sniffed. It's pretty great range, actually. I designed the remote to function through walls. That's why I combined the IR and RF. So it's controlling something outside the house. How far would the range be? Reed asked. Pickle frowned. You mean if the skeleton was outside and Ori was inside? Reed nodded. Yeah. Sure, that's what he meant. He didn't mean if the remote was controlling Julius' exoskeleton. No, he didn't mean that at all. Pickle tilted his head and thought about it. It might reach a few feet outside the house. Maybe, honestly. I've never checked. It probably doesn't reach beyond the house. The outer walls would be thicker than the inside walls. More inference. Oh, Reed said, attempting to sound uninterested, even though he had asked the question. Okay. Reed tugged his shirt and then was sticking out a suddenly sweaty skin. He suppressed a sigh of relief. Pickle leaned forward. Why'd you ask? Ori now had the robotic skeleton racing through the room and dizzying serpentine routines around the furniture. Reed tried not to imagine Julius zipping around the robotics room in a similar fashion. If he was doing it in a suit, what Pickle's robot was doing here, Julius would be bashing the walls and furniture. He'd be, at least, badly bruised. More likely, he'd broken bones. Oh man, Reed thought, that might be truly torturing Julius. Reed? Reed looked at Pickle. He was suddenly elated at his friend's genius in extended reading minds, and he was also glad that Pickle also sucked in deciphering facial expressions, body language, and other social cues. Reed was sure to deliberately blank face was as effective as he wanted to be. He was trying to be innocent, but he had a feeling he looked like Thals did when the dog stole a cookie and trying to pretend he didn't. Oh, I was just curious, Reed said. It's impressive, that's all. Pickle raised a thick black eyebrow. Okay. Pickle might not have been able to read personal visual cues, but his brain was like an auto recorder. He remembered everything he had ever heard or read. He was going to go through the database and contracting everything Reed had ever said to him before today was just Reed had just said. Reed had never before told Pickle that something he'd done was impressive. He also so used to Pickle outperforming everyone around him that praising Pickle for doing something was like praising him for breathing. Pickle definitely found Reed's last comment strange. Pickle opened his mouth. He was going to ask a question, but Ori saved Reed. He plowed Pickle's exoskeleton inside of Shelley's miniature house. Metal hit the wood, hiding with a thud, and Shelley sat up in the sofa. She stuck a bookmark in her book, clearly already confronted her little brother. Before he could do that or say anything, though, Ori backed up a robotic skeleton and ran it forward again. He giggled and repeated the action, bumping a little robot into the miniature house over and over. Joey jumped up. Hey, Ori, stop it! He's not going to hurt it, Pickle said. Let him play with it. I'm not worried about your robot, Shelly said. He's going to hurt my house, and he's going to mess up my project. Shelly started toward Ori, who giggled and darted away from her. Shelly chased Ori, but he easily stayed ahead of her. He continued to play with the remote at the same time, and the little robot kept butting in the house. Ori, you little twerp, Shelly said. I'm going to break your sibling Viniculum if you don't cut that out. Viniculum was one of the daily words of the previous week. It meant bond. That one stuck in Reed's head because he thought when Shelly defined the word, that would mean like deeper vinculum with her. Ori, if you ruin my project, what project? Reed asked. He didn't care. He was trying to distract himself from thoughts about Julius, and if he were controlled by Pickle's remote, was probably being slammed into the wall of the classroom right now. Or what, he was being slammed into something sharp, like one of Mrs. Billings' robotics arms. Could Julius get impaled? It's a project for my psychology class about family dynamics, Shelly said, bending and lunging for her little brother. Seriously, Shell? That's okay, Pickle said. The robot isn't going to hurt the house. He was going to have any sharp edges. Pickle set aside the book and scrambled out of the dad's chair. He went over to where the robot was stacking the house over and over, leaning forward and pointing at the tiny rough pieces overlapping wood when he was gray shingle siding into the real house. And he said, see? Not a scratch. Shelly stopped pursuing Ori. He came back to the miniature house, knelt down and examined it. Oh, she shrugged and returned to the sofa. Okay. She picked up the torch, her book, and presumably returned to the medieval torture. What if Julius had been tortured right now? What if he'd been battered pretty badly before everyone Pickle's robot was doing? Pickle sat down on the floor and sat in Shelly's house, and he reached the snatched up robot. Ori, desist for a second. Ori shoved his lower lip. But I wanna, he began to whine. I'm not gonna take it away from you, Pickle assured his brother. I'm gonna make it more fun. Pickle held up his metal skeleton, which was whirring in an effort to respond to remote's commands. Ori's lower lip returned to the normal position. He stopped playing with the remote, and his face brightened. Yeah? What are you going to do? He came over and sat next to Pickle. I've got something cool to show you, Pickle said. Something else you can do with this. Pickle put down his robot and he nudged Ori. So watch this, Pickle whispered. Pickle flipped a switch on the little robot. Now try it, Pickle said to Ori. Ori grinned and pushed a button in the remote. The robot stood in a blockish head. What did you just do? Reed asked Pickle. Oh, I just turned off the joint constraints, so now my robot can go against logical joint directions too. Like yours, only on purpose. Ori carefully pushed the buttons and toggled the joystick and remote. The little robot flipped off its head and turned into a metal contortionist. It started crawling across the floor like an octopus, its joints wrapping in impossible pretzel-like shapes. Looking at once like it was turning itself inside out, it was expanding and contracting the way a beating heart did. The robot became a fluid. It resembled a snake. Ori directed the robot into the entry area. It clicked and clicked over the slate and undulated across the floor. Reed stared at it, his throat constricting. In his head, instead of the sound of robot metal limbs contacting the hard floor, Reed could hear the snaps and pops of breaking bones. Julius breaking bones. The sounds were in his head, weren't they? He was imagining it, not hearing it, right? No, of course, he wasn't hearing it. How about he could hear it? Pickle said the robot's range wouldn't reach much beyond the George's house, and even if that happened, Reed wouldn't be able to hear it. His ears weren't superhuman. They were miles from the school, and if his mind were telling him to hear Julian's bone banks, his mind was lying. Reed's fears were so stupid, he couldn't believe his mind was coming up with stuff it was asinine. There was no way Pickle's remote would have impact on Julius's framework, therefore he was having no impact on Julius. So why did Reed feel so rotten? Why is his stomach in his throat? Why did he feel like he might throw up all the food he'd eaten? Did he intuitively know something? Was his intuition right about and his logic wrong? Reed took a deep breath and started an exoskeleton. Focus, he told himself. Stop imagining all that stupid stuff. Reed leaned over his project, tried to concentrate on his exoskeleton joints, but he couldn't. Ori was having just too much fun with Pickle's robot. Now the boy was making things arrive all over the place. He was practically dancing with glee. Pickle turned to his dad's easy chair and picked up his book. Shelly was still lost in her own reading. Ori started to make robots assault Shelly's house again. Shelly glanced up, but apparently comforted by Pickle's assurance, she placidly returned to her book. Reed scrambled off the floor. He had enough. I'll be back, he said. I have to do something. Ori ignored him, continuing to aim the flopping robot at Shelly's house. Pickle looked up in his book. Where are you going? I have to do something, Reed repeated. What? Pickles asked. What would Reed say? He couldn't say. I have to go to school and free Julius. Even though it's exactly what he had to do, he tried to run 3 blocks to his house, get his bike, and pedal back to school. Then he had to get in a locked school without setting off an alarm. Thankfully, he overheard the senior talk about a basement door he was wired to the school security system, and the key ringing next to the janitor kept it in a fake rock. Then he had to get through the darkened school and wetting his pants like a scared little kid, and then he had to unlock Julius and run for his life. No, wait. He should go check on Julius before running. What if the worst fears were true? What if Julius was badly injured? Wouldn't Reed have to call an ambulance? He got groaned out loud, but he stopped himself and Julius was dead. Reed? Reed blinked and he realized Pickle had said his name. What? He said. You said you had to do something, Pickle reminded him. I asked you what you had to do when your brain took a vacation and turned into a weird statue. Statue? Reed was stalling. He tried to think a reasonable story. What does he have to do right now, other than go save Julius from a modern-day version of the wheel? Shelly, Pickle said. I think something's wrong with Reed. Shelley looked up from her book. Of course something's wrong with Reed, he said. He doesn't engage in enough intellection and he lacks appropriate nesis when it comes to schoolwork. Oh snap, Reed thought. Even in his agitated state, he recognized that Shelley had used 2 words of the day. However, he was far too distracted to care about what they meant. I'm not talking about Reed's commonplace imperfections, Pickle said. I'm referring to the fact that he's currently making no sense and his body keeps forgetting how to remain animated. Well, see, that's what I like about Reed, Shelley said. Reed perked up, momentarily forgetting everything, but finding out that Shelley liked about him. What's that? Pickle asked. Reed was relieved he didn't have to be the one who asked. He rarely makes sense. I like that. It gives me a challenge and keeps me interested. Reed couldn't stop himself. He grinned like a maniac. Thankfully, no one was looking at him. Pickle and Shelley were looking at each other, or his gaze was on the little robot, whose metal limbs were now distorted like they looked elastic. I can see your point, Pickle said to Shelley, but my original question remains. Pickle returned attention to Reed. What do you have to do? Before Reed could come up with something lame, the little robot hit the side of the miniature house again, but when it did, something large hit the outside of the Gerard's house. Shelley looked at the French doors and their attention back to her book. Wind must have come up. We probably lost another branch off of the big fir tree, Pickle said. Reed looked at the window. A short time Miss Gerard had left. Night had slipped in and around the house. Now blackness clung through the windows like a fungus. Reed couldn't see anything in the framed glass of the French doors except the reflection of the room he was in. In the reflection, he watched Ori aim the robot outside the house again. He watched it hit the miniature house, and in the same instant, something hit outside the house with a reverberating thump. Reed tensed. He looked at his friends. Neither Pickle nor Shelley reacted to the latest sound, and apparently satisfied with the wind and fallen branch explanation of something thump. Or since they were reading again, they may not have even heard it. Well, Reed heard it, and the wind explanation didn't cut it. He was listening intently now. Even though he'd heard the impacts against the house, he wasn't hear the wind strong enough to blow the branch in the house and would make the noise. He shouldn't have been hearing a whistling, whooshing sound if the wind was blowing that hard. And except for the continued crackle of the fireplace and the sound of a robot hitting Shelley's little house, the only other things Reed would hear the impact on the side of the house. Every time a robotic skeleton hit the model house. What if it was Julius out there? What if it was truly been manipulated by Pickle's remote all this time? By now, what condition would Julius be in? What Reed lacked in intellection may made up for imagination. He would actually easily envision a body covered in swelling, black and contusions. He would see limbs limp as rubber and bone fragments poking through the skin. He'd see a battered face, beating skull, and a spine warped into something sickeningly abnormal. If in this exoskeleton Julius had been spun, then bashed into things over and over, he had been twisted and torn the way Pickle's robot had been. Would Julius even be human anymore? Would he be a mutilated mass of broken bones and torn flesh? Was it Shelley's history book that said of victims of the wheel? A victim of the wheel ended up looking like a moaning monster of bloody tentacles. Yep, that's what Julius would have become, and everything Ori had done to Pickle's robot had been done to Julius's exoskeleton. Ori ramming the churning robot in the miniature house and again. Outside, something hit the real house with a similar force. Reed couldn't believe Shelley and the brothers were ignoring the sounds, whether or not hear them. You ever said you were going? Pickle said. Another robot impacted the model house. Another thump outside. Pickle didn't mention the mimicking sound. Reed's gaze gave out and dropped to the ground. He was no longer eager to go outside anymore. No, he wanted more than anything to stay inside, maybe forever. He looked around. There's still smart windows and doors locked. What if they weren't? No, of course they were. Mr. Gerard wouldn't forget to lock up. He was frantic about the safety, about keeping her children well fed. Reed? Reed looked at Pickle. Oh, I forgot I was thinking of. You forgot you wanted to leave a few seconds ago? Pickle asked. Reed nodded. I think I ate too much. My brain is drowning in buffalo sauce. Pickle came up with a partial smile. Mom does make great chicken wings. He leaned forward. Hey, I wonder if there were any more. Are those popper things? He looked at his sister. Hey, Shell, do you know if Mom put away any extra chicken wings and popper things? Shelley looked at the book. Huh? Chicken wings, poppers. Oh no, they're all gone, Shelley said. And you can't be hungry already. How's it fair you get to eat so much and stay so skinny? My life would be paradisical if I would eat like you and no consequences. Like paradise, they thought, in spite of himself. Ori had stopped plowing the robot in the miniature house. Now he's circling the robot around the house at dizzying speed. I can't help it if I'm hungry, Pickle ordered sister. Well, you can't be hungry. Maybe you're just thirsty. I want a soda, Ori called out. And the first thing he said once he returned to playing with Pickle's robot. Hey, that sounds good, Pickle said. We don't have any, Shelley said. Why? Pickle asked. Remember? Mom read an article about combination of carbonation and sugar. He discovered that our body's process of mixture as well as poison in the system. Right, I do remember that, Pickle sighed. We shouldn't let her read. All it seems to read are the things that make our lives suck. Reed, who by now had wounded himself tighter than Pickle's grasping the basic math, blurted, Your lives don't suck. Pickle had an open mouth, turned to look at Reed. Sorry, Reed said. Sorry. Pickle said nothing, but Shelley put down her book and looked at Reed with one eyebrow raised. Reed shrugged. It's just that you're so lucky to live in this nice house and a mother who always makes good food for you and loves you, and he stopped because he felt like he was going to cry and he did not want to do that. It was a stress. He was making himself crazy with his panic. The little robot started climbing up the side of the Shelly's miniature house. It looked like somehow grown suction cups on its legs. It scaled the side of the toy house as if it was a spider. For a moment, Reed had mesmerized by the robot's functionality, then realized he was hearing something outside the Gerard's house. Something new, something majorly disturbing. Something was crawling up outside the wall of the family room. No, that couldn't be. Could it? Reed tried to block out the sound with the little robot's clinks and drones. He listened hard beyond that. This wasn't just a shuffling sound of something around the house. Yes, there was sort of scrabbling similar to what the sound once saw a raccoon climb up the side of his own house. Maybe it was a raccoon out there now. Maybe he was really going insane. He was imagining all this. Maybe he was going insane and what he was hearing was impossible. But then, why would he suddenly be going loopy? Was it guilt? Was it unadulterated wuss in the second it had come a little gusty, his brain lost a grip on reality? Was he going crazy because he'd locked Joyce in an exoskeleton? You're right, Pickle said. Reed almost jumped out of his skin. What? Pickle cocked his head at Reed's peculiar behavior. I said, you're right. We are lucky. It's illogical of me to have allowed to escape my awareness. Perhaps my blood sugar's low. If I had a soda. We don't have any, Shelly repeated. I want a soda, Ori said again. He must have been wanting one badly because he was still playing with the robotic skeleton. He'd gone to climb up the second floor of the small house. Reed jumped up and headed down the stairs. Where are you going? Pickle asked. Reed stopped. Good question. He didn't normally wander around the Gerard's house if he lived there. He'd been upstairs, of course, to both the twins' bedrooms and even in Ori's bedroom, but he'd been in their rooms when they were in their rooms. That reason would he have to go upstairs now? What reason, besides the uncontrollable need to know if something was clutching on the exterior walls of the house or the second floor windows? Sorry. I thought I have a book I need to borrow. I was going to get it. I should have asked first. Pickle studied Reed for a few seconds, then he shrugged. Sure, go ahead. You don't need to ask. Your family. This, for some reason, made Reed choke and cough, as if its words created an emotional hairball in his throat. But he knew it would words of choking him. It was guilt. No one in the Drawer family would have done what he did Julius. Even if Julius was still in the locked metal skeleton robotics classroom, the Sherry wouldn't have let Julius be tortured, possibly to death, by Pickle's remote. The second they had been inkling that might have happened, they would be gone to check. What Reed lacked was initiative, motivation, ineptness. Aha, nesis, an effort to attain a goal. Reed shook his head. His brain was weird. He was a total freak out because it was pretty sure he'd torture someone. He was now climbing up outside the Gerard's house, robot exoskeleton. His brain was defining the words of the day. Maybe if Reed had been Nesis this evening, he would have saved Julius before Julius started crawling up the side of the house. Stop it, Reed screamed in his head. Julius is not on the side of the house. Oh, how Reed hoped he was out of his mind. He had a very, very, very bad feeling, though. He was sane as everyone. For some reason, he did just come clairvoyant, or was it omniscient? Or maybe he was observant and scenery aware. Because he would hear something that was definitely more than not tree limbs crawling against the house. Reed realized that Pickle had been given him permission to go upstairs, and Reed was still standing there. What was wrong with him? He shook himself and strode the stairs. When he ran up the stairs two at a time, on the landing, Reed stopped and looked around. Now that he was here, what was he going to do? If he looked out the window and possibly saw actually what he was afraid to see, what was he going to do about it? How could he get rid of Julius in the exosuit without his friends knowing? Heck, for that matter, how could he get rid of Julius, period? Reed looked up and down the hall in complete indecision. What now? Shelly's tidy white and green room in the light. Shelly loved white and green. The colors of purity and life, she once told Reed. Pickle's cluttered black-walled room on the left. Ori's race car motif bedroom was across from Pickle's room. A small pale yellow half bath was straight ahead of Reed. Light suddenly shined through the window in the bathroom. From outside, Reed gulped. He remembered that the Gerards had motion sensor lights in the backyard. One of them wanted to come on. Reed stared at the window intently, but nothing else happened. Except for the light. He didn't see anything. Nothing appeared in the windows. No shadows, no movement. He could hear something moving anymore either. He strained to listen. Nothing. Remember, he was supposed to be up here looking for a book. He figured he should head to Pickle's room and find something that he would come up with a plausible explanation for wanting. He ignored the prickly sensation in the back of his neck, and he took a step in the dark hallway. Images of Julia's maimed body, jumped in the forefront of Reed's mind. He had to swallow down a scream. It was out of control imagination, he thought. Flipping a switch just inside the doorway of Pickle's room, Reed gratefully left the dark hall and entered the friend's domain. Stuffed with books, CDs, and scientific equipment, Pickle's room was somewhat of a laboratory than a bedroom. And only a twin bed with Constellation's bedspread suggested the room might have been a boy who just was his teens. He rested his face, screamed, "Genius!" Reed crossed the Pickle wall-to-wall bookshelf. He went to the section where he knew Pickle kept fiction. Pickle read more non-fiction than fiction, but he would have a selection of sci-fi books he claimed were educational, as many as his science books. Reed plucked one of his books from a shelf without looking at it. After he had the book, he stepped over the window and looked out Pickle's gray curtains. Unfortunately, the light of the room gave him a little more than his own reflection. He hadn't thought that, obviously. No, you don't know. Try to see outside at night from a well-lit room. But even in the reflection of the room in the way, Reed could see through, nothing was outside the window. Clutching his book, he'd taken from the shelf, he turned the door. He spotted bloody tissues on Pickle's nightstand. Pickle's nose. Reed was supposed to remind him to ice his nose. He'd do that when he get back downstairs. If he got to go back downstairs. If what if Julius in his possibly ruined state was lurking outside the windows up here and waiting for Reed to appear and crash through the glass and get revenge? Why was Reed even up here? He should have been hiding far away from thought Julius' exoskeleton was. He went toward danger instead away from it. Someone who wasn't 100% sure danger was real. Reed had to know whether his thoughts were right or crazy. He made himself return to the hallway so he would continue his search in whatever was or wasn't out there. It was still dark enough upstairs and it was still silent. Reed kept up the hall to Ori's bedroom. At the threshold, he tripped over something and caught himself with the door jam. His heart rate shot up. He heard a metallic clink in his foot and made a contact with whatever it was. What if it was the exoskeleton? He quickly turned on the light, almost afraid to see what was on the floor. It was a toy fire truck. Reed exhaled. He looked around Ori's chaotic mess. He couldn't remember seeing so many toy cars in one place, not even a toy store. Ori had one of those rugs and racetrack on it. Toy cars were scattered over the track and beyond the racetrack onto the wall-to-wall carpet, too. Nothing unusual there. A bright red shade in a cartoon race car was pulled over Ori's single window. Reed couldn't bring himself to open that shade and look outside. As he flipped the light switch and stood once again in the hall, he occurred to Reed that turning on the lights had been that smart. Not only did the interior lights impair his night vision, but the lights telegraphed where he was. If something was outside, it wouldn't have been hiding just turn on the lights. Well, it was just dumb. Why would Julius be hiding? If Julius was outside. If anything was outside. Reed wasn't sure what the point that either possibility would bring him relief. Whether there was a broken and gory monster clinging to the side of the house or Reed was having a complete mental breakdown, either way, he wouldn't just be standing there forever. Reed? Shelley called from the bottom of the stairs. Reed froze. Had he been caught reading her diary or something? Yeah? His voice broke. We're going down to the corner to get sodas. Do you want to come with? No, that's okay. You go ahead. I'll stay here if that's alright with you. Sure, just don't go into Ori's room. You'll probably break a foot on one of those cars. I'm pretty sure he has some kind of vehicle assembly line in his room. Sally snorted, and then Ori protested in the background. I do not. Wait, what's an assembly line? Reed smiled. For a second, he almost felt normal as he listened to Pickle, Shelly, and Ori head to the door. Oh, Reed? Pickle called. Reed went rigid again. He cleared his throat. Yeah, what? Don't tell Mom where he went if she comes home early, Pickle yelled up the stairs. You're an idiot, Shelly told her brother. You think she doesn't know everything we do? She does? Ori asked in an odd tone. Everything? Everything, Shelly said empathetically as the front door opened. Reed listened to the stomps and shuffles of a friend. Leaving the house. The door slammed. He waited. He heard the rock slide into place. He heard the silent thank you for the way Shelly would adopted her mother's safety and consciousness. By the time he heard ultra aware he was completely 100% alone in Gerard's house, he had thought outside would be bad for him. Really bad. What if Julius had been waiting for the opportunity just like this? But why? Why would Julius just be a lacerated monster? Would he just want to kill anything in sight? Wait, now Reed's brain was actually getting way out there. Just because Julius might have been mangled by an exoskeleton Reed had locked him into, Nori had inadvertently made him do things that tortured Julius in mind-crumbling pain, just didn't mean Julius had suddenly turned into a killer. He was just a kid. Maybe a horrible kid, but even now a badly injured kid, but just a kid. But was he just a kid? Not really. Julius was a really mean kid. Reed would never forget the day Julius first showed up to school in 3rd grade. He wouldn't forget it because his own torture started. Julius had been tormenting Reed for 6 years. Julius seemed to thrive on humiliating other kids, and he seemed to get downright euphoric of being hurt them. For all Reed knew, Julius was already a killer. At the very least, he'd probably been murdering and dissecting squirrels for years. So if Julius was now in unspeakable pain because of what Reed did, it made sense that he'd become even more homicidal now. Reed didn't know for sure, but he figured agony brought on the worst in a person. The house creaked and Reed leaped out of his pointless thoughts and back into the dark hole. That sound was just the house creaking, wasn't it? And listened for several minutes. He didn't hear anything else. He crept down the hall into Shelley's room, where he wouldn't step anything in there. He was obsessed with order. Going slowly, he felt his way through her room and reached her window, which he knew overlooked the front of the house. Standing in the back of the edge window, he lifted the edge over heavy green curtains and peeked outside. Nothing was out there. What should have been? Below the window, the porch roof along the house, by the street, by the mailbox leaning a little to the left. 2 large cedar trees stretched their branches toward the Shelley's window. One of the branches brushed against the side of the house, although, as Reed had thought, it wasn't windy, it was a slight breeze, and the branch moved against the siding. What was the sound Reed had heard earlier? Had he gotten himself all worked up for nothing? He hoped so, but he didn't think he worried about nothing. Scanning in the night, he searched for any sign of movement. He saw none. Stepping away from the window, Reed picked out his way to Shelley's room. In the hallway, he hesitated. Should he go into Mr. and Mrs. Gerard's room? He looked around. As long as he didn't touch anything, why not? It wasn't like he was going to turn the light and snoop around. He just wanted to look out the big window, which overlooked the backyard. Reed crossed the hall and stepped into the master bedroom. The night light near the master bath desk, a dim glow throughout the room. He created a creepy shadow. But at least it was maneuvering the window easy. All he had to do was swivel a rocking chair away from the window and nudge aside the curtain. He was able to see nothing unusual. Again, the yard looked away from all its quiet. Enough of this! Reed dropped the curtain and strode from the room. He looked over the hall and ran down the steps and returned to the family room. The family room looked the way it had been when he left it, minus the Gerard siblings. Apparently, Pickle had put a small log on the fire after Reed went upstairs. Because the fire was flaring up behind the metal screen that protected the room with stray sparks, Pickle's book was on the end table with his dad's easy chair. Shelly's book was lying on the sofa. Reed sank in a cushy carpet. He looked around. There was a little robot. He didn't see it. Did Ori take it from him? Reed spotted the remote on the floor next to the sofa, but robot wasn't in sight. Maybe Ori got stuck under a piece of furniture. Reed turned to look to show his miniature house. It was a really amazing thing. It seemed to be accurate in every little detail. All the furniture he could see in the front porch accurate. Inside, though, the open windows were exactly like the real furniture in the Novosad's house. What was the art and stuff, he wondered. He scooted over to examine the house more closely. As he figured he could have, Shelley recreated all the art and knickknacks inside the house. Anything in the real house and the toy house. He even put pencil marks on the dates on the wall inside the kitchen doorway that marks in the dates in the chronological Gerard kids' growth for years. And outside, one of the downspouts was bent like a real one in front was. It got bent, and Reed and Pickle were trying to learn how to throw a football. One of the errant tosses, though forceful, went badly askew and left a permanent indent in the middle. Reed shifted again, and he looked at the miniature version of the room he sat in. Wow, he breathed. His super miniature house made a miniature house. Talk about realism. He wouldn't have been surprised at him that Shelley was her model house. She really never did anything halfway. If she couldn't do it well, she stopped doing it. And if she couldn't do it well, she stopped doing it. Reed remembered finger painting with Pickle and Shelley in kindergarten. The teacher had been wandering around telling everyone they're doing great, but when she got to Shelley, she didn't say anything. Aren't I doing great too? Shelley asked. Of course, kiddo, teacher said. You're lying, Shelley accused. I can tell you by your tone of voice. She stood up and put her hands on her hips, careful to avoid getting paint on her red pants. Reed remembered watching her teacher think it over. He really decided on the truth. Well, you aren't really getting to the point of finger painting. It's to be free with the color and have fun. You're trying too hard, making everything too perfect. Fine, Shelley said and reached up, grabbed her paper and marched over to put her finger painting in the trash. Reed grinned at the memory. And then he saw something silver and shiny glint through the window at the back of the mini model house family room. He leaned forward and canned his head and could see behind the mini model house. Aha, there's where the little robot went. It's inside the miniature house, behind the mini miniature house. Reed started reaching a miniature house to rescue the robot. Before he could get a hand through the front door, though, a little robotic skeleton raised up on the floor of the house. Reed jumped, and he started to shake his head at the edginess. And then Julius sprang up from behind the model house. Reed scrambled backwards, screaming. In his mind, he caught what he'd seen Julius become a vivid imagination. He prepared him to see the boy he looked now, but Julius didn't look anything like Julius. He was, in fact, exactly what Reed's mind had known Julius would be. Now anything but a fleshy octopus with massive, pulpy limbs attached to a metal frame. Julius no longer to be called a boy. He couldn't be called human. Reed wasn't even sure what Julius was alive. Yes, Julius moved, but Reed didn't know that was Julius initiating the movement or if his corpse was being controlled by the metal framework latched into Julius and a loathsome external parasite. Julius' face was slack, and there's no life there. It was slack because it looked like a bone structure of his forehead, cheeks, and jaw had been pulverized. His features were so distorted he resembled some sort of crudely sewn cloth version of himself, no longer framed by a wavy blonde hair because of that hair was now sticky and stringy and congealed blood. Julius' face was a repulsive doll's face, a doll much worse than Alexa's baby doll with staring back eyes. Julius' eyes were 1,000 times more disconcerting than empty black ones. His eyes had rolled back in his head and all showing his whites, the murky, cloudy whites. His ghostly whites made him look like a sightless zombie, and just like a zombie, Julius, alive or not, was moving. He was moving determinedly toward Reed. Reed willed his legs to work, and he struggled to find his feet. Looking wildly in the room, he tried to decide the best escape route. The windows? They compiled the latching system. He wouldn't be able to get them open in time. The doors? Duh. He ran toward the French doors. He knew the special lock, the line that requires keys on the outside or the inside, but the key was kept near the door, wasn't it? He scanned the area near the door. No key. He realized he had no idea where the drawers kept their key, and had no time to look for it. Turning, Reed ran toward the entryway. The Julius thing scuttled from behind the major house and tumbled across the floor after him. Reed tore through the archway, rounded the corner, heading towards the front door. Before he could get there, though, Julius sprang to the ceiling and skittered past Reed to block his way to the front door. Reed couldn't pause to consider his options. He raced up the stairs. Glancing over his shoulder, Reed watched in horror as Julius in the metal frame flailed crushed limbs and grotesquely to catapult from every entry ceiling to the stairway wall. Julius' thing scaled the stairway wall as Reed ran. Reed was barely able to get ahead of the pursuer. At the landing, Reed got a glimpse of Julius leaping in the ceiling again. Reed turned, aiming for Pickle's room. His plan would call it that, but he used Pickle's scientific equipment as weapons to keep Julius at bay. And Reed escaped out of Pickle's front-facing window. Like Shelley's, it was over the front porch roof, so Reed had to need to stop 2 stories to the ground, although at this point, he had dropped multiple stories if it meant getting away from Julius, or what was left of him. Feeling something at the same time rubbery and sharp nick his shoulder as he tore into Pickle's room. Reed managed to get a light on what he entered. He grabbed the first piece of equipment he saw, a big, heavy microscope, almost too big for him to lift, but he managed. Once he had the microscope in a firm grip, Reed turned and swung blindly out in front of him. He was sure he'd connect with Julius because Julius was right on his heels. but Julius wasn't there. Reed looked around desperately. Where did Julius go? Reed looked up. Julius' abomination dropped off the ceiling and landed on Reed before Reed could swing the microscope again. The impact knocked the microscope from Reed's hand. It tumbled across the room, and Reed screamed and tried to squirm out under the horrendous combination of the hard, sharp metal and squishy, clammy, destroyed body parts. At the same time, he tried to hold his breath because Julius' thing smelled dreadful. It smelled like blood, putrid flesh, and stale sweat. It was dripping on Reed, too. Julius' flesh was no longer stylish clothing, perforated by puncture wounds caused by jutting, cracked bones. He was smeared in dried blood, and his body still sweeps fresh blood, too. Galvanized by the revolution, Reed shook out his metal and flesh attempted to engulf him. He thought of all the strength he had and he'd obviously got it from somewhere else. At first, Reed thought he was going to be able to get away. Julius' hands didn't work right. If they couldn't grip Reed firmly, Reed managed to slid out from under Julius, and he stood preparing the race around the bed and escape out of the window. But what Julius lacked in coordination, the grip made up for speed. Reed made it halfway to the window when something caught his foot. No, not something, Julius, or his frame, or both. Reed looked back at the combination of metal and tissue coiled around his ankle. Let me go, Reed yelled. Why does he waste his breath? Did he really think shouting command would stop whatever Julius had become? It would stop human Julius. It wasn't sure going to stop for this version of Julius. Reed kicked out, and his foot slipped away a little. Then Julius clamped down harder. How? How was Julius able to grip anything without working bones? It didn't matter. Reed was distracting himself with all the irrelevant thoughts. He was trying to put up the inevitable. Reed wasn't about to get away from Julius, not even if he made it to the window. Julius, now powered by a robotic framework, a mere human couldn't defeat, especially if the human was Reed. Plus, Julius now seemed to be supercharged by the monstrosity that he'd become. And the monstrosity had been born of some kind of emotions propelled humans past their usual limitations. Emotions like pain and fear. Emotions like rage. Julius's rage was more powerful than Reed's guilt. Reed didn't stand a chance. But he tried, kicking at his feet if the power swimming against the tide. Reed's army crawled across the rug. He willed himself away from what held him. He imagined himself going through Pickle's window and jumping to freedom. Reed made out a banshee-like cry and yanked his foot from Julius' grasp. He staggered his feet and started toward the window. Before Reed could take a step, though, Julius was on him again. This time, Julius fell fully onto Reed, and they both went down on Pickle's bed. Reed was pinned under Julius' hideous remains and the metal frame strapped to them. Reed inhaled Julius' stench and gagged. Even as he gagged, he cried out, "Help!" Whose help was he calling for? No one else was in the house. Were the neighbors here? Reed's face was just inches from Julius' lifeless eyes and sagging mouth. Gagging again and whimpering, Reed turned his face away from the horror above him. He shut his eyes and could make a macabre attacker disappear by pretending it wasn't there. His heart pounding so loud he could hear little else. Reed bucked and lurched, trying to free himself from the thing, but he wasn't strong enough. Even though Julius had been gripping Reed had any work, his weight alone, along with that of the metal framework, was enough to pin Reed in place. Reed was strapped, particularly hyperventilating in shock and fright. Reed forced himself to open his eyes and look at Julius. When he did, he was sorry. He immediately closed his eyes again. He wouldn't stand looking at the milky white irisless eyes staring down at him. Or were they staring? Reed didn't know if Julius was conscious. How would he be with bones crushed in the smithereens? It was most likely Julius was dead, and the movement of the thing strapped into it caused by some kind of short in the system. Maybe if the inference of Pickle's remote was so badly fried the exoskeleton system is mildly functioning on his own now. Something dripped onto Reed's face. He had opened his eyes, and worse, not knowing what was happening above him. Reed opened his eyes. Maybe not knowing wasn't worse. Blood was spooling from the spongy mass that used to be Julius's face. It looked like a misshapen sponge that had been used to clean up a massacre. And now it was dropping its warm, wet contents on Reed's cheek. The previous cream-colored scarf looped around Julius' neck was saturated, too. It hung around Reed like a dead animal in the slaughterhouse. Mesmerized by how the whites of Julius' eyes bulging out from the long, blonde lashes, Reed couldn't turn away from the malformed thing above him. But he still struggled. Grunting, he shoved up toward all his might. He didn't go good. It was the weight of 100 cars pinned him down. Please, please, Reed whispered. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I didn't know it was going to happen to you. I wanted to be locked overnight. I didn't want this to happen. He knew there was no use begging, but he couldn't help himself. He opened his mouth to say something else, but that's when the question of whether Julius had consciousness is answered. Julius shifted downward, pressed his heavy, secret mass against Reed's mouth. Reed could no longer speak, but he could hear. In the distance downstairs, the other kids were returning a soda run. Reed could hear Pickle suggesting to Show that he could construct a better torture device than anything medieval people could come up with. I'm not sure what would be accomplished from it, Pickle, Shelley said. Reed strained, grunting, desperate to get their attention, tried to yell. Reed only make unintelligible groans. Downstairs, Ori piped up. Can I play with the remote again, Pickle? Julius shifted. And Reed allowed himself a moment of hope. Maybe he could get away. Pouring every bit of life force into the muscle, he surged upward. He hoped to erupt like a volcano and get ejected from Julius toward freedom, but he didn't erupt. Or rather, he did, but before he getting ejected away, Julius' cage imprisoned him. Julia's smashed hand somehow grabbed a hold of Rita's outstretched hands. Julia's formless legs somehow managed to wrap tightly around Reed's ankles. Reed was now linked to Julius, and Julius has a exoskeleton, and Reed knew what was going to happen next. With the pressure of Julius' face wedged between Reed's throat, Reed was going to make a sound that he heard downstairs. As he was facing the worst nightmare he couldn't scream. Downstairs, Pickle responded to his brother's question. Sure, Gory, go nuts. We have all night. Ori grinned and knelt to the floor against the miniature house, usually interested only in cars and racing. Ori was surprised at how much fun the robot was. Maybe he would get his brother to build him and other things. He had never been able to get a robot to move this way before. It was super cool. Pressing a button, Ori got a little robot car out from behind the miniature house. He carefully maneuvered the robot out of the miniature house and not wanting to get his sister's bad side. One time, he ran a little skeleton into the wall, and when he did, he heard something bump on the floor above his head. He looked up and didn't hear anything else, so he continued carefully guiding the robot out of the house and onto the miniature porch. When he got out, he let a little fist bump. Happy with himself, Ori grinned wider and decided to see if things could get the robot to do even weirder things. There was nothing before he got a soda. He began manipulating the robot so fast his finger was just a big blur. In response, the little robot shot off the toy house porch and began sprinting and thrashing. While Ori shouted in triumph, the little robotic skeleton began popping and snapping its metal limbs in all kinds of unnaturally delightful ways.
I wish we were a nice family, Chris said. He and his parents and his sister sat around the second-hand dinner table, eating hot dogs and canned baked beans and macaroni and cheese that come from a box. What the heck is that supposed to mean? Chris' dad said. He was still wearing his uniform from the garage and his name, Dave, stitched with the cursive letters over the jeans breast pocket. Do you think we're all a bunch of jerks or something? I mean, look at your mom. Is this the face of someone who isn't nice? Chris' mom flashed an exaggerated angelic smile and fluttered her mascara-painted eyelashes. And what about your little sister here? She's not nice? Chris' dad pointed the forkful of macaroni and cheese in Emma's direction. I'm very nice, Emma said, pushing her glasses up with a freckled nose. She was in fourth grade and was, Chris thought, bossy beyond her years. She gestured at a green uniform, complete with sash full of badges. I'm a Girl Scout and everything. See, it doesn't get nicer than that, Chris' dad said. And everybody knows me and says I'm reasonably nice. The guys at the garage, my customers, my buddies I go bowling with, people tend to like me, or at least they generally don't run away when they see me approaching them. He reached for another hot dog, a mistake given his growing waistline, Chris thought, and squirted an excessive amount of mustard. So, what do you mean when you say our family isn't nice? Chris felt like his father misunderstood him. This is a regular occurrence. No, you're all nice people, Chris said. That wasn't what I meant. What I meant was, Chris searched for the vain words that would express his thoughts in offending his family members. I guess I don't know what I meant. But really, Chris knew exactly what he meant. His parents were decent people, good citizens who loved their kids and worked hard for the family and community. His little sister was annoying in the way younger siblings were, and he would never say she was a bad person. That being said, when he compared his families to the smartest kids in school, they fell short. Part of it was his parents' education or lack thereof. His mom had started working as soon as she graduated high school and still had the same job at a utility board he'd gotten when he was 18. After Chris's dad had finished high school, he had gone vocational school who learned how to work on cars. He had an excellent reputation as an auto mechanic, but that job didn't strike Chris as prestigious enough. His dad came home every day, dirty and smelling like axle grease. In Chris's opinion, truly successful people didn't need to take a shower as soon as they got home from work. When Chris went out to the restaurant for a store or school function, he always felt embarrassed. His mom was loud and flashy. She wore the brightest colors she could find and the reddest lipstick and the biggest and shiniest costume jewelry. His dad, despite his daily after-work showers, always had grease under his fingernails, so he never looked quite clean. But then there was a matter of his weight. Chris's dad's belly protruded over his belt. Sometimes his shirt rode up, and this great shelf of his disdain got escaped and hung out for all to see. When he sat on his pants slipped down, his shirt rode up. In the back, what he exposed is even worse. Chris knew his parents were nice. He just wished that they would and act appropriately in public. The smartest kids at school had parents who always knew how to look and act. The dads wore jackets and ties and khakis and polos. The moms wore tasteful blouses and dress slacks and subtle, expensive jewelry and makeup. These parents were professionals, lawyers or engineers or medical doctors. They had careers and required years of schooling beyond high school. It was the kind of career Chris wanted. The kind of jobs that Chris' parents worked led to deficiency in other areas. Money. They weren't poor, no, they owned their house. But it was a plain, dumpy house, barely big enough for a family of four. And the furniture was mostly hand-me-downs from Chris's. Both of the vehicles were ancient and only kept running because of Dad's mechanical know-how. They had a creaky old shared family computer, and as Chris's video game console was so tragically out of date, he couldn't buy new games for it anymore. They only got basic cable. Honestly, who just had basic cable these days? When Chris rode around town the school bus, he always noticed the subdivisions were full of fancy two-story brick houses. He liked to fantasize about the families who lived in them, the doctor dads and lawyer moms and their high-achieving kids, all dressed in designer clothes, eating grilled salmon and steamed vegetables and salad for dinner, and then lounging in rooms that they had where they're ready to be photographed or one of the home and garden magazines you always saw in the waiting room of the doctor's office. The parents probably played golf and tennis at the country club while their kids splashed around in the pool, and they never had any worries about how to pay for the kids' college once they were old enough. That's what Chris had meant by wishing they were a nice family. He wanted a nice life for them, and nice things, and a bright future for his sister. Clearly, it wasn't wrong to want more for life than scrapping by every month to pay the bills, then having to buy off brand items at the grocery store to save a few cents. Emma, it's your turn to do the dishes tonight, Chris's mom said as they finished their meal. Okay, Mom, Emma said, and annoyed Chris now proper if she was. She ever get sick of doing the same chores over and over? Chris, I told Mrs. Thomas you'd help take her out her trash tonight, Mom said, getting up from the table. After that, you can take pork chops for his after-dinner walk. Chris didn't want to do either of these tasks. Why were parents always exploiting kids for free labor? Mom, he said, trying to keep his voice from rising to a whine. I'm busy tomorrow, the first day of school, and I've got to get ready. Taking out Mrs. Thomas' trash and walking pork chops will take 30 minutes, tops. That gives you plenty of time to get your stuff ready for school tomorrow. She could tell from the tone of Mom's voice that she was going to put up with any argument. Okay, but I won't like it. I know you won't like it, his mom said. It's part of my evil plan to oppress you. She did a fake laugh like a villain in a cartoon. Come on, I'm trying to make you laugh here. Emma, who was already clearing the table, laughed, but Chris wouldn't give his mother satisfaction. It was a theatrical laugh. He got up from the table and left by the back door to go to Mrs. Thomas's house. Miss Thomas was old, so old that Chris's parents were always amazed that she was still managed to live alone and take care of herself. She had been a high school English teacher for over 40 years, teaching Chris's parents along with many generations of the town's high school students. Now, though, she had been retired and widowed for many years and lived in a small, boxy, book-cluttered house and just her cats for company. She cooked and did light housekeeping to herself, but Chris's parents helped her out with anything that required heavy lifting, or at least, in the case of the garbage, they forced Chris to help her. The arrangement was that night before garbage day, Chris would come to Mrs. Thomas' house, empty all the trash cans in the house, take the bags to the big garbage pail in the driveway, which she would then take to the side of the road and it would be ready for pickup in the next morning. Chris had once asked Dad if he could at least be paid for his weekly responsibility, but his dad said, sometimes you don't do a job for money. You do it because it's a decent thing to do. Chris had taken that as a no. Chris knocked on Mr. Thomas's door and prepared to wait. He moved slowly, and it always took her a long time to answer, and she finally came to the door. She was wearing the same yellow cardigan she wore year-round. Even now it was hot outside. She was a tiny, delicate, bird-like woman. Her glasses were thick, and her hair was thin and gray. Hello, Christopher. It's nice to see you to come over and help me. She was the only person who ever called him Christopher. Sure, Chris said. But really, it didn't matter being nice. It was more that he was still a kid, and when his parents made him do something, his only choice was to do it and suffer the consequences. Please, come in, she said, holding the door open. There's just one big bag of trash that needs to go out. It's in the kitchen. The house was dark and smelled musty. The walls were lined with full bookshelves, and every piece of furniture in the living room had at least one cat sleeping on it. She followed her to the kitchen. Could I interest you for some cookies before I put you to work? Miss Thomas asked, gesturing to the cat-shaped cookie jar on the kitchen counter. No, thank you. I just had dinner. Miss Thomas's cookies were cheap and kind they sold at 99-cent store, and they were always stale. After taking up her cookie offer twice, he had learned to say no. Well, that's never stopped me from having a cookie or two, Miss Thomas said, smiling. Your mother tells me you're starting high school tomorrow. That must be exciting for you. Yes, ma'am, Chris said, anxious in the conversation to end so he can get back to doing stuff that really mattered. She was bragging about what a good student you were and how much you would love to learn. You know, I taught at your high school for many years, English literature. If you ever need help with anything in academics, just let me know, and if you ever want to borrow any of my books, you're always more than welcome to. Thanks, but I'm more of a science guy than a literature guy. Don't put yourself in a pigeonhole yet. You're too young, Miss Thomas said. And there's already no reason you can't be both a science guy and a literature guy. There's so many wonderful things in the world to learn. Chris lifted the garbage bag filled with mostly with empty cat food tins and a trash can. I'll take this out and roll the big so you can go out on the road, okay? Miss Thomas nodded. Thank you, Christopher. You're such a great help to me. Chris walked back toward the yard, and he knew Miss Thomas was trying to be nice, but in the kind of sad that she thought she could help him with the school stuff. He had gone to the little local college a bazillion years ago, then taught high school English until he retired. It wasn't like she had got some great intellectual, plus she was so old she'd probably forgotten what little she had known. She was sure that she could teach him nothing. Chris opened the gate and fenced-in backyard where Porkchop was wagging and waiting. As soon as Chris was inside, Porkchop jumped up on him and craned his neck to go and lick Chris's face. Get down, Porkchop, you're getting me all muddy. Chris backed away from his dog, dirty paws, and tried to dust off his pants. Chris just wanted a dog, but Porkchop was not the dog he wanted. Chris had wanted one to be smart, beautiful, purebred dogs, and he was seen on dog shows and TV, a border collie or a Shetland sheepdog. But his dad had said they couldn't afford a purebred dog, and anyway, it was immoral to buy an expensive dog from a breeder when there were so many dogs in shelters that needed good homes. And so, one evening, and Chris was in the sixth grade, his dad had come home with Porkchop, a brown and tan, overgrown, snaggletooth shelter mutt who bore no resemblance to the elegant herding breeds Chris admired. It immediately cleared that Porkchop also lacked the intelligence to learn tricks or agility skills Chris had dreamed of teaching a dog. Instead, Porkchop was a happy idiot whose favorite activities focused on his belly, either filling it or getting it rubbed. Ready for a walk? Chris asked, without much enthusiasm. Porkchop made his Chris lack of enthusiasm by wagging, barking, and running in small circles. If you won't sit, I can't put a leash on, Chris said. He couldn't believe how much time he was wasting carrying out his parents' orders. He attached the leash to Porkchop's shoulder. Once around the block, that's all you get, he said. Walking around the neighborhood was depressing. The house was small and identical to little boxes, which had originally been built for the workers in steel mill, and had shut down many years before Chris was born. The yards on which the houses sat and the postage stamp small, and they were sure he was the only kid in the science club who lived in a lousy neighborhood. He hoped he could be where he lived a secret, and other kids who, we were sure, all lived in fancy neighborhoods on the west side of town, with names like Wellington Manor or Keshington Estates. As promised, he took Porkchop around the block once, then brought him to the house and emptied a can of dog food into his bowl. Porkchop happily gobbled it up. Finally, with all his chores done, Chris could go to his room and start getting ready for the first day of high school. Not only did he need to get his backpack filled and organized, he also had to decide what he was going to wear. His mom had taken him to shopping a week before and bought him 5 shirts, 3 pairs of jeans, and some new sneakers. And they were gone to his awful big box store because the prices were too affordable. That what Chris had picked out and looked okay, but he wished he could have real name brand clothes from the ones at good stores in the mall. His mom said nobody could tell the difference, but he knew this was a lie. She told him to try to make him feel better. Still, Chris was feeling hopeful. The first day of high school was a fresh start, a chance for him to prove himself, a whole new ball game, his dad would say. A man never met a cliche he didn't like. The thing that Chris was most excited about was joining the science club. At West Valley High, Mr. Little's science class and the club he supervised were legendary. Mr. Little's classroom was lit by plasma balls and lava lamps and a string of glowing bubble lights. He was famous for demonstrating spectacular experiments that involved fire and carefully controlled explosions. Though he said he made the students didn't work on anything he wouldn't put them in actual danger. He also famous for jump-starting student projects that produced extraordinary results and almost always won science fairs in the West Valley competed with other schools. Science Club was famous for bringing back numerous trophies to West Valley, and Science Club students had a reputation of being the school's highest achievers. On freshman's orientation day, when the new students were given the opportunity to sign up for class, Kristen made a beeline for the Science Club table. That was the only club that he signed up for. Why waste your time on anything inferior, Chris thought, when you could just be with the best? Chris was especially looking forward to this weekend, which was a traditional lock-in that Mr. Little held every year with the students. The entire class would spend the night at school, working on a secret project Mr. Little's assigned, and reputation for being a life-changing experience, one that secured your status in the science club and the school. Chris wanted his status to be the best of the best. Chris, your friends are at the door, Chris's mom called her in the living room. Josh and Kyle, Chris thought. He felt vaguely annoyed. He had a lot of preparation to do and to ensure that he made the right first impression on the first day. He was in a serious mood, and Josh and Kyle never were serious in anything. Be there in a minute, he yelled back. He finished loading his backpack up with school supplies before he went to the door. At least he can get that done despite the interruption. Josh and Kyle were waiting in the living room. Josh had let his hair grow out over summer, and it hung in dark brown waves on his shoulders. Kyle had dyed a purple streak in his hair and was wearing a t-shirt for some brand with a skull and crossbones on it. Chris was a little nervous about the fact that Josh and Kyle would also be starting in West Valley High tomorrow. They had been friends since they were preschoolers, but he hoped that they would hang out all over during school hours. They were nice guys, but he feared the image they projected wouldn't go over well with the science club kids. He didn't want his old friends to hold him back from making new, higher status friends. Hey, Josh said, pulling his hair back behind his ears in a habit he'd picked up and letting it grow. That's our last night of freedom. Yep, Kyle said. Tomorrow they lock us back up and throw away the key until next summer. Actually, I'm kind of excited about going back to school, Chris said. I mean, it's high school, you know. Same thing with a different name, Josh said, sounding like he was bored already. We're going to take a ride bikes over the dairy bar and then go down to the lake. Want to come? Of course you are, Chris thought. It was that they always did. He was supposed to be nice as well, come along for the old time's sake. Tomorrow his life was going to change. It was full of smart friends, science projects, and academic achievement. The ride bikes and ice cream to childhood was just a memory. Sure, why not? He rolled the boys outside and got his bike. Race you to the dairy bar, Kyle yelled like he always did. They took off. Chris intentionally didn't pedal as fast as Josh and Kyle. He figured he might as well let them win. There are many achievements in his future, so maybe he can let one of them win the race to have some small sense of accomplishment. Soon, he would be leaving them in the dust in other ways. Josh won, but not that it mattered. At the dairy bar, they each ordered their customary chocolate vanilla swirl cones and sat on one of the wooden picnic tables to eat them. Even though the ice cream was good, Chris could still imagine better treats he would have in the future once he had risen to the social status he aspired to. Then he would eat luxurious desserts and only read on seen or TV, crepes, Suzette, molten chocolate lava cake, creme brulee. I haven't seen you in the server much lately, Chris, Kyle said in the middle of school, like they were like to meet up online and play Night Quest, a popular multiplayer game together. Yeah, I guess I have more important things on my mind lately, Chris said, licking his cone. Why, is something wrong? Josh asked. Nobody in our family is sick or anything, are they? No, nothing like that, Chris said. I've just been thinking about, the future. The future, like with robot overlords and flying cars? Josh asked, grinning. They're so incapable of being serious, it's infuriating. No, Chris said. Like my future, my goals, and what I want for out of life. That's some pretty heavy thinking for summer break, Kyle said. At the beginning of our summer, I would take my brain out, put it in a jar, and put the shower in the shelf, and don't take it out again until school starts. Josh laughed. So that's what you've been doing when you get home tonight? Putting your brain back in your head? Nah, I'll probably wait till the morning. No need to start thinking any sooner than I have to. Josh and Kyle were both laughing, but Chris couldn't muster a smile. How could he even end up being friends with these losers? He was supposed to be. It was just because Josh lived next door and Kyle lived across the street. They'd been flung together because they'd been the same age and lived in the same place. If Chris had grown up in a nicer neighborhood, he would have ended up with a better class of friends.
Josh laughed. So that's what you'll be doing when you get home tonight? Putting your brain back in your head? Nah, I'll probably wait till the morning. No need to start thinking any sooner than I have to. Josh and Kyle were both laughing, but Chris couldn't muster a smile. How could he even end up being friends with these losers? He supposed it was because Josh lived next door and Kyle lived across the street. They had been flung together because they were the same age and lived in the same place. If Chris had grown up in a nicer neighborhood, he would have ended up in a better class of friends. After they finished their ice cream, they got back on their bikes and to go to the lake. What they called the lake was really just a large pond. Once they got there, they did the usual. They looked for flat stones, skip across the water. They tried to approach the Canada geese, then laugh when the geese hissed at them. They talked about video games and internet memes and nothing in particular. Looking at the lake was really a pond. Chris thought of the word stagnant. The pond was nowhere near. It wasn't even a river or just a little stream that flowed when somewhere else. Become a part of something bigger. Instead, it just sat there, growing algae and gross bacteria, going nowhere and becoming nothing. Unlike the pond, unlike Josh and Kyle, Chris had no intention of stagnating. He was going places. Chris woke up early the first day of school. He took a shower, brushed his teeth aggressively, and applied a double coat of deodorant. He ran a little gel through his short, neatly cut, sandy brown hair to make sure it wasn't going anyplace. He put on the polo shirt and khakis that he set out the night before. He wished again that they were a better brand, but at least they were clean and new. Hey there, my big freshman, Mom said when he came into the kitchen. She assaulted him with a hug. Mom, stop, Chris said, squirming away from her, sitting at the table. He poured himself a bowl of cornflakes and started slicing a banana over them. Mom sat down across from him, holding a cup of coffee. She had already done her hair and makeup for work. As always, it was a little too much in Chris's opinion. Her hair was dyed a shade of red and wasn't found in nature, and she was wearing a leopard print top and black leggings and leopard print shoes. She wished you would aspire to simple elegance instead of cheap glamour. I know get tired of me talking about how big you've gotten, she said, but when you're parents someday, you'll understand. You'll start out with a little tiny baby with toes the size of corn kernels, and then it seems like no time passes till your baby's tall and you have to look up at him. Chris didn't comment. He crunched the cornflakes. What was there to say? He had grown. It's what kids did. It wasn't like it was some great achievement or anything. Anyway, I'm proud of you, his mom said. Proud of your sister, too. It really seems like she would be a baby, but you should have seen her this morning. She got herself all ready and walked to the bus stop. So independent. She smiled. There's a little smear of lipstick in her front tooth. Say, I don't have to be at work till 9 in the morning. Do you want me to drive you on your first day? Chris nearly choked on his cornflakes. He didn't want a science club kids at his new school to see his overly made-up mom pull in a 10-year-old economy car that rattled and wheezed like somebody's great-grandpa. What kind of impression would that make? No thanks, Mom. I'll just take the bus. What did I say? Independent. His mom reached over the ruffled hair. Now he would have to comb it again. On the school bus, Josh and Kyle were sitting next to each other. When Chris boarded, Josh said, Hey, Chris, time to turn ourselves back into the jailer, huh? Chris ignored him. It was an empty seat across from the aisle of Josh and Kyle, and he ignored that too, and found another empty seat farther back in the bus. It was better to be seen alone than to be seen with the wrong company. He looked around the bus, trying to figure out if any kids looked like being the science club members. West Valley High was much bigger and more crowded than Chris's old middle school, and in the hallways he had to concentrate and keep himself from running anyone over, and not to run over himself. It was hard to concentrate on navigating the hallway when his brain was consumed on one thought. Third period is Mr. Little's class. Third period is Mr. Little's class. After what felt like an eternity and a half, third period arrived, and Mrs. Chris and his classmates crowded into the room. At the end of the hall, and beheld bizarre wonders of Mr. Little's classroom. Chris took a seat and looked around. The walls were plastered with posters, some outlining a scientific method and showing cell structures, others displaying science-related puns and wordplay. One said, "In science, matter matters," and another said, "Think like a proton, stay positive." The shelves that line the room are filled with more scientific curiosities, and Chris would take it at once. The one nearest to him displayed a variety of glass jars filled with clear fluid and different biological specimens. One jar held some poor creature's heart. Another housed a fetal piglet with two perfectly formed heads. Yet another contained what disturbingly looked like a human brain. Mr. Little stood before the lab table and headed to the classroom. He wore the white lab coat over the collared shirt and brightly colored necktie printed in the design of a DNA helix. He was a small, energetic man, the literal incarnation of his last name, and he was smiling like the master of ceremonies in a particularly exciting show. His safety goggles, worn over his regular glasses, made his eyes look huge and insectoid. "Come on in, find a seat, don't be shy," he said as the students filtered in his classroom. "I promise there will be no major explosions or dismemberments, at least not on the first day." He flashed a naughty grin. Chris didn't know everything he would be learning in this class, but he already knew one thing. He had never met a teacher like Mr. Little. "All right, let's go ahead and get started," Mr. Little said, even though tittering among the students didn't die down. Chris expected Mr. Little to raise his voice, take out his roll book, or start taking attendance, but instead he poured some kind of clear solution into a glass container held over the Bunsen burner. Within seconds, a huge fireball appeared, the flames falling just short of licking the ceiling, then disappeared instantaneously. Everybody in the classroom gasped. I thought you would be getting your attention," Mr. Little said, grinning, "but I promise, you ain't seen nothing yet." He looked around the room. "This is science, and it's not for the faint of heart or the cowardly. It's not about just reading a textbook and answering questions correctly. It's about innovative thinking, and it's about getting your hands dirty. It's about experimenting with all the word experiment implies. Sometimes we succeed, and sometimes we fail, but either way, we learn. In this class, I may ask you to do some stuff that sounds kinda crazy, but I promise if you bear with me and follow my advice, by the time you're done with this course, you'll be thinking, talking, walking, and quacking like a scientist." He looked around the room. "Now, who's ready to learn some cool stuff?" Everybody clapped, hooted, and cheered. Chris already felt like he was a member of an exclusive club. "Now, before we get to the fun stuff, we have to jump through a few bureaucratic hoops," Mr. Little said. "That first being the lab's safety contract, which you and your parents must read and sign, saying that you will not intentionally blow up the school or another classmate." "Oh, where's the fun in that?" a kid in the front row asked, and everybody laughed. "Oh, it's always good fun until you have to scrub somebody's viscera off the walls," Mr. Little said. "I do hate it when students leave a mess." More laughter. The boy sitting in front of Chris raised a hand and asked, "Are you going to talk about the lock-in?" "Yes," Mr. Little said. "There will be a meeting in this room right after school today, and for everybody who's interested in coming in a lock-in this weekend, I strongly suggest that you come for both the sake of your grades," he mouthed the words extra credit, "and for the sake of science." Once class was dismissed, the boy in front of Chris turned around. "I haven't seen you around here before. Are you a freshman?" His brown eyes were intense and intelligent. "Yes," he said. "How about you?" "Sophomore," the boy said. "Sanjay Patel. Everybody calls me San." Chris Watson. San radiated not only intelligence but confidence. Chris suddenly, desperately wanted to be a kid like him. "Are you going to the science club?" San asked as they gathered their belongings. "Sure. It's practically all I thought about since I knew I was coming to West Valley." San smiled. "Once you're in, it'll still be all you think about. Do you have any lunch this period? Do you have lunch next period?" Chris nodded, hoping the lunch invitation. His conversation seemed to be going well. "Yo, so do I, and a lot of science club people. Why don't you sit with us and let everybody get a look at you and what they think?" "That would be great, thanks." Chris was happy to be included, even if it was seemingly on a trial basis. In the cafeteria, he sat with Sam and two other kids. A tall, lanky, red-haired boy who just introduced himself as Malcolm, and Brooke, a petite black girl with springy dark curls. "Chris, is in Mr. Little's third period class with me. San explained by why the introduction was settled down to eat their lunches. Chris was the only one of them eating the lunch the cafeteria provided. The others all had packed lunches with fresh fruit and raw vegetables and sandwiches on whole wheat bread. Chris made a mental note to tell his mom he wanted to start bringing his lunch. He would also have to be specific about what kind of foods to buy and pack. He couldn't let these kids see him eating a peanut butter and jelly on soggy white bread. Well, you must be reasonably intelligent then, Malcolm said, looking Chris over. Mr. Little only lets a handful of freshmen into his level 2 classes. Brooke smiled. Yeah, freshman doesn't have to take Mr. Harris's earth science class. I know, right? Chris said. Josh and Kyle were in Mrs. Harris' class. Oh, come on, guys. They do lots of really challenging experiences, Malcolm said. Like mixing vinegar and baking soda to make a volcano. His voice dripped with sarcasm. You're terrible, Brooke said as they all laughed. They also collect fall leaves and glue them on a construction paper, Malcolm added, though it's hard of an assignment for most of them. Chris laughed and some more along with his and soon-to-be Hope friends. San could barely contain himself. And their final exam, he said, laughing so hard he could speak, is try to find the school cafeteria. Many fail, of course, Malcolm said, snickering. Chris can remember the last time he had laughed so hard. Of course, he felt a little bad because his friends laughed about the stupidity of Mrs. Harris' students, but he also laughing at Josh and Kyle, who had been his friends since he was old enough to walk and talk. But he knew he was going to reach his goals. He couldn't be sentimental. It was time to move up in the better class of friends. As soon as the dismissal bell rang, Chris hurried to Mr. Little's classroom. He couldn't wait to hear about the lock-in. Other students must have felt the same way because when he got there, the room was nearly full and a buzz of chatter. He found an empty seat near San, and I wonder what Mr. Little has cooked up this year, San said to Chris. Chris smiled. I don't know, but I hope it's cool. Oh, it will be, San answered, as though Chris's statement implied some type of doubt in Mrs. Little's abilities. Until you experience it, you can't possibly understand. It'll be life-changing. Chris nodded. He guessed he didn't understand, but he was looking forward to learning and life-changing experience exactly what he needed. Hey, San said, Malcolm and Brooke and I have a study group that we meet at Cool Beans Coffee on Wednesdays after school. You should come. Are you sure? Are you Malcolm and Brooke okay with it? Chris asked. He didn't want to appear pushy, like he was trying to force his way into the friend group. Yeah, they suggested it, San said. They like you. Chris smiled, and he could feel his life changing already. The room fell silent when Mr. Lowe's entered. He walked down the aisle of the classroom like a celebrity walking in the red carpet. Then he stopped and stood before them and said, Greetings, my sweet little guinea pigs. Are you ready to hear what kind of experience I have planned for you this weekend? The students clapped and hooted. Chris wasn't used to seeing such displays of enthusiasm in a classroom. It was refreshing change. First of all, Mr. Little said, starting at pace, scientifics requires sacrifice. Science requires sacrifice. If you're not willing to make a sacrifice, you have to put up a part of yourself for the sake of science. Then don't bother coming in on Friday because the lock-in isn't for you. Stay home and do whatever it is you do for your little electronic devices or go play a sport or whatever. Only come here if you are willing to make a sacrifice and experience the transformation. Transformation? Chris felt like a word that was looking to describe what he was seeking. He wanted to transform his life, to transform himself into something different, better, more worthy. In the past, some of our science club lock-ins have been group activities. This activity is one you will do alone. In fact, each of you will have a cubicle sequestering you and the other students from me as well. So each of you will be issued your own Freddy Fazbear Mad Science Kit to work with. In this kit, you'll find a solution called Fazgoo. You will put the required amount of Fazgoo into the provided petri dish. He smiled. Then comes for the sacrifice. With pliers, you will pull one of your teeth. A gasp rose in the crowd. Chris heard himself gasp too. One of their teeth? Surely he hadn't heard Mr. Little correctly. Excuse me, Mr. Little, could you repeat that part? One student asked in a nervous style. Teeth, Mr. Little yelled. You will pull one of your teeth. It might hurt a little, but trust me, it'll be worth it in the end. Now, you are scientists, or are you a bunch of sniveling babies? Scientists, most students yelled back. Good, Mr. Little resumed pacing. So you will pull one of your teeth, I said, and you will place it in the Fazgoo. When you will have a scientist spend a great deal of time doing, you will wait. You will be provided a cot to nap on while the process unfolds. And what process is that? One student asked. Well, what fun would it be if I told you that? All I'll say is the process of discovery. Mr. Little's eyes were wild with excitement. You will know when you're done because the results will speak for themselves. Literally. Then you will dispose of your creation in a biohazard bag and leave. A changed person, and not just dentally, but mentally. He cackled at his own joke. But Many students joined in on the laughter. There's a rumor, Mr. Lowe said, that's not participating in the lock-in hurts your performance in my classes. That is not exactly true. If you do not participate in the lock-in, but you successfully complete all the course requirements, you will pass my class, possibly, with an above-average grade. However, over the years, I have found that students who do not participate in the lock-in demonstrate a level of commitment that allows them not just to pass, but to excel. And the fact that the lock-in is worth 500 points of extra credit doesn't hurt either. He grabbed a stack of papers off his desk. Now, for those of you who are up to the challenge, I will now distribute the required parental permission sheets that will allow you to participate in the lock-in. But please make sure you don't say anything to your parents about the required tooth extraction. I don't want you to be receiving end of any dental bills. Also, as a community of scientists, we must keep our secrets. Chris felt excited and also scared. He wouldn't let his fear stop him, though. You didn't transform yourself by playing it safe. You had to take a risk. Try new things. Then Mr. Little offered him a permission slip. He grabbed it. There was only one part of the lock-in that Chris dreaded. The more he thought about it, the more nervous he became at the prospect of pulling out one of his own teeth. Chris had always been squeamish about dental matters. He was a little and had loose baby tooth. He would procrastinate pulling it until the tooth hung by the smallest threads. Sometimes he was lucky the tooth would just come out of him even having to touch it. He lost one on an apple once, another on an ear of corn. Another time, when he had one tooth that he had been letting hang on for another number of weeks. His dad had asked to see it, then yanked it out without warning. Chris had been mad at him for days. Then there was a matter of dental visits. Even if it was just exam and cleaning, Chris was consumed with anxiety for weeks before. His mother told him to loathe the trips to the dentist as much as she did. She was wanting to get him there and put him up with the moaning and groaning before, during, and after. Chris lay awake all night, thinking. The lock-in was 2 nights away. If he could just figure out a way to participate in the experience without having to pull his own tooth. Chris, your friends are at the door, his mom called. Again? Chris thought, and showed a less serious Josh and Kyle there to show up and want to hang out at school tonight. Tell them I have homework, Chris yelled. Come tell them yourself, his mom yelled back. Chris rolled his eyes and got up to bed. He went to the door to see Josh and Kyle. Hey, he said, I can't hang out tonight. I've got homework. Can we just stop by for a sec, Josh said. Kyle's mom's going to drive us to the mall on Friday. We're going to eat at food court and see a new Revengers movie. We wonder if you wanted to come. It was kind of them to ask, but their pastime seemed so childish now. Thanks, guys. I'd love to, but I've got a science club to lock in that night. Oh, you're doing that? Kyle said, sounding incredulous. It seems kind of sad to spend most of your weekend in school. Well, I think it's exciting, Chris said. Kyle and Josh exchanged a look. Just don't get too deep into science club stuff, okay? Josh said. Some people in Mrs. Harris' class were talking about it yesterday. They said it's weird, like a cult or something. Chris couldn't help but be offended. Josh and Kyle might be cut for the science club themselves, but they at least show in proper respect. Well, people in the science club talk about the people in Mrs. Harris' class too, Chris said. Yeah, Kyle said. They say we're dumb? Because they're snobs, Josh added. Kyle gave Chris a strange look. You're not turning into a snob, are you, Chris? No, of course not, Chris said. He hated that word, snob. It was the underachievers called high achievers, trying to make them feel better about themselves. Well, he refused to take the bait. Do you think Josh and me are dumb? Kyle asked. Chris cringed a little. It's Josh and I, he thought reflexively. And you're not dumb, you just lack maturity and ambition. But he figured it would be a bad idea to say either of those things out loud. No, of course not, Chris said again. Look, guys, I've got to back to my homework. Maybe we can do something next Friday, okay? They said sure and okay, but Chris could feel the distance between them and his old friends growing. It was a painful transition, but it was probably for the best. Bye, guys, Chris said and shut the door. In the living room, Chris's mom was leaning over Emma, who was sitting on the couch. Count to 3 out loud before you do it, okay? Emma said. Before you do what? Chris said. His mom looked over him. Emma's got a loose tooth. I've got to pull it for her. Chris felt a stomach lurch. Well, don't do it while I'm here. You know that stuff grosses me out. Why couldn't this family tend to distasteful matters in private instead of in the middle of the living room? It's just a sign of how unrefined they are. Mom laughed. Wait till you're a parent. None of this stuff has grossed you out as a kid until it'll bother you anymore. Chris shook his head. I don't know about that. If I have a kid, he'll definitely have to pull his own loose teeth. Chris played the scene in the tooth extraction and went back to his room. As soon as he was alone, his thoughts turned to the science club lock-in. The idea hit him like a jolt of electricity. Loose tooth. Of course, that's the answer. Chris had walked past the Cool Beans coffee probably 1,000 times, but he had never gone inside. For some reason, it hadn't felt like it was for him. It was too sophisticated and adult, full of professionally dressed grown-ups and sitting in their laptops and cardboard cups. But today he was going to change. Chris was going inside. He was swung open the door and immediately greeted by a dark, toasty smell of coffee. The paintings local artists hung the cafe's brick walls. Chris had never told himself how not to be nervous, but from now on he was kind of placed where he belonged. Hi, Chris, San waved at him over Malcolm and Brooke were sitting. Their table strewn with open textbooks, notebooks, and coffee cups. Get a drink and join us. Great, I will. Chris called back. He studied a menu board over the counter. It was confusing than anything he had studied in class. There were mochas and frappes and cappuccinos and lattes. There were single shots, double shots, decaf, half calf. Chris had never taken so much sip of a coffee before. He had no idea what any of these words meant. This pretty young woman at the counter said, "May I help you?" "Sure, I'm just not very experienced as a coffee drinker, so I don't really know what I want." She smiled. "How about I just make you something I think you'll like?" Chris was relieved to have the responsibility out of his hands. "Sure. Do you like chocolate?" "Of course. I'm not stupid. What kind of weirdo doesn't like chocolate?" Chris thought. She smiled again. "Let's try an iced mocha, then. Give me a couple of minutes." He turned her back to him and poured some different syrups into a machine. Chris couldn't decide if her actions looked more like chemistry, wizardry, or wizardry. Shortly after, she returned with a huge clear plastic cup filled with whatever appeared to be rich chocolate milk topped with whipped cream and chocolate shavings. It looked like the world's fanciest milkshake. The price she quoted was $2 more than he expected. He hoped his new friends didn't see him having to dig through his pockets and his backpack for a change. He took his expensive beverage and joined Sam, Malcolm, and Brooke to their table. They were all drinking hot coffee from paper cups, and compared to theirs, his milkshake-like drink looked childish. He'd admit it was delicious, though. "So, it looks like we're going to France this winter break." "Again," Malcolm was saying. "I really wanted to do Italy, but my mom can pass up the shopping in Paris. I'm going to be so bored to tears. I think we're doing the Caribbean cruise this year. I guess it'll be okay," Sam said. He turned to Chris. We were talking about family vacations and how we'll never get any say in where we go." "Same here," Chris said. He hoped they didn't ask him about where his family had gone on vacation. Chris' family vacations are always the same. His parents took a week off in the middle of the summer, and they rented a cabin in a state park a couple of hours away. They spent a week fishing, swimming, hiking, and cooking out. They were always hot and buggy for the most part, and they had fun. But Chris knew it was a poor people's vacation. "Oh, that looks good," Brooke said, nodding toward the drink. "Is that a mocha?" "Yes," Chris said. He was going to have to study up on coffee lingo. His parents drank coffee, and he just kind of brought from the grocery store and made in the house. "Mine is too," she said. "I got just hot instead of iced." Chris felt less self-conscious about his drink now. "You need to loosen up around your new friends," he ordered himself. They wanted invited to join him. They wanted him there. It was time for him to start acting like he belonged. "So what kind of results do you think the experiment will produce?" Dan asked and looked around the table. "Well, clearly we'll be growing some type of tissue," Malcolm said, sipping his coffee. "I just don't know what it will do." "It will do something, though, that's for sure," Brooke said. "Hopefully nobody will end up in the emergency room like last year." Chris was choking on his coffee. "Wait, what?" Brooke laughed. "Some kid didn't follow the instructions right and ended up having a couple of fingers reattached. It wasn't his fault, though. He ended up transferring to Miss Harris's class, where he was less likely to maim himself. The experience was perfectly safe if you know what you're doing, and that kid clearly didn't," Malcolm said. "Speaking of knowing what you're doing, if we're calling ourselves a study group, we better get down to studying." Chris was usually already home when his mom came in from work, but today she beat him there. "There you are," he said and came in. "I signed your permission to the school thing. I was worried when I didn't see you. I was just about to call and check on you." He was sitting on the couch with a glass of iced tea, her bare feet propped on the coffee table. She didn't move, but extended a hand and a paper. "You join a study group with me after school," Chris said, pocketing the slip. His mom laughed. If some other kid told me that, I might think he was lying. He'd run around after school about who knows what. But I believe you." "I know, I'm a nerd," Chris said, sitting beside his mom on the couch. "I'm proud you're a nerd," she said, smiling. "I was wondering," Chris said. "Might it be possible to have a small increase in my allowance?" Mom took her feet off the coffee table and sat up straighter. "How much are you talking?" Chris had to calculate a figure that wasn't outrageous, but still covered the price of expensive coffee drinks and study group meetings. $10? Mom furrowed her brow and made a low whistling sound. "And what do you need $10 more for a week for?" "Is this study group actually? We meet at Cool Beans downtown, and I need money for coffee." "Gotten hooked on the stuff already?" His mom said, shaking her head. "Listen, kid, those frou coffee drinks are real money suckers. One gal I work with used to buy one every day, and when she quit the stuff, she was amazed how much money she saved. The fact is, we're lecturing him. We're not promising." "Why don't you guys study in the library?" his mom said. "The library is free." Chris felt a wave of annoyance sweep over him. "Mom, I don't start the study group. I just joined it." "Well, maybe you could suggest meeting in the library. I'm sure it would save everybody a lot of money." Chris rolled his eyes. "If I suggest that, they'll think I'm poor, which I am compared to them." His mom sighed. They're just your friends. They don't care how much money you have. You shouldn't care about how much they have either. Mom, Chris said, the verge of losing temper. That's not the way the world works. She sighed. I know it's not. I wish it was, though. He looked at Chris with a sad smile. Okay, I can give you $5 more a week, and that's all. I'm glad you're making friends and take school seriously. Study hard, so you can get rich and support me in my old age. Thanks, Mom, Chris said. This time, he didn't object to when she gave him a hug. Chris was buzzing with excitement when he walked into Mr. Little after school on Friday. He knew the lock-in was going to be a transformative experience, probably the most important experience in his life to date. He hoped to complete experiment to Mr. Little's satisfaction and gain the approval as well as the approval of the entire other science club members. Chris wasn't the only student who was excited. As he entered the classroom, he felt a high level of energy. It felt electric. Everybody was talking and laughing. Some people stood in pace instead of sitting in their desks, too restless to sit still. Chris still took his usual seat behind Sam. Sam turned around and grinned at him. Your first lock-in is a big day for you, right? Yeah, Chris said, smiling back. It is for me too, Sam said, but it's even bigger for you because it's your first time. After tonight, you'll be a full-fledged member of the science club. All eyes on me, all mouths closed, Mr. Lowe called from the head of the classroom. I know you're excited. Heck, I'm excited too. But there's still some very important directions you follow exactly or experiment won't work. He pushed his glasses up to his nose. I've also taken the liberty of ordering some pizzas, which should be here shortly. Cheers rose from all over the classroom. It's going to be a long night, and you better conduct scientific research on an empty stomach. But while we wait for subsistence, allow me to explain more specifically about what you'll be doing tonight. As you can see, I have set up private cubicles for each of you in the lab. In your cubicle, you'll find a long table and cot for napping. On the table, you'll find a Freddy Fazbear Mad Scientist kit. There are a few chuckles in the class, and one kid said, Isn't that kit just a toy? It's most definitely not a toy, Mr. Little replied, his voice turning stern suddenly. If you treat it as one, you'll be at your own peril. He held up a kit for everyone to see and open it. In this kit, you'll find a container of Faz goo and a petri dish, like this. He held up a vial of pink glop in a small dish. You will empty the Faz goo into a petri dish, then come to the sacrifice. The tooth, Chris Hatch whispered. Yes, the tooth, Mr. Little said, grinning wildly. You will use the pliers. You have the pliers to extract the tooth of your choice. I would advise you near the back. When your wisdom teeth come in, you won't have to worry about crowding. Chris heard a sharp intake of breath of someone behind him. All of a sudden, his stomach felt queasy at the thought of a tooth extraction. He was glad that he had figured out a way around it. If you can't handle this part of the experiment, now it's time to leave. Mr. Little looked around the classroom. It's time to separate the real scientists from the wannabes. Chris looked around the room. Some kids looked scared, but none of them moved. Good, Mr. Lowe said, nodding approval. I like my students to be fully committed. After you have extracted the tooth, you will place it in a petri dish of Faz goo, and that, he said, rubbing his hands together, is when things will start getting interesting. You see, the Faz goo will not only take the tooth to stay alive, it will make the tooth believe it is still part of you. A tooth can believe something? Brooks asked. Well, it can still feel as inside of your mouth, Mr. Little said. The Faz goo is very powerful. When you touch it, it creates a tendril, a connection, that slowly pulls red blood cells from your body. The blood cells need the Faz goo and fuel the experiment. And there's the amazing part. Over the course of several hours, nourished by just a few of your red blood cells, the tooth will grow gums and will form from the full mouth, and the mouth will open up and tell you something, and I promise, no matter how old you live to be, you'll never forget. Chris looked around at the classmates, all of whom were wearing an identical look of disbelief. You'll see, Mr. Little said, looking around at all the stunned faces. It will be amazing. Once the mouth has told you what you need to know, it will die. I have provided a biohazard bag in the cubicle. You will dispose of the mouth and the Faz goo in the bag. After you have brought me the bag so I can dispose of it correctly, you are free to go. Mr. Little looked toward the classroom door and smiled. But first, pizza! He waved at Mr. Delivery guy to come in. You have 30 minutes to eat, drink, and socialize, Mr. Little said. But after that, it's time to get to work. Chris grabbed a couple of cheese slices and a paper cup of soda, and sat down with Sam, Brooke, and Malcolm. I guess this will be the last pizza I chew with my left back molar, Malcolm said, but he sounded more amused than scared. I'm a little worried pulling out one of my teeth will mess up my orthodontia, Brooke, who had a mouthful of braces, said. Yeah, your orthodontist was going to be mad, Sam said. Will your parents be mad too when they find out? Brooke shrugged. Not if I tell them it was a science club assignment. They'll let me saw off my own arm if they knew it would improve my chance of getting a good college. My parents would too, Malcolm said, and they laughed. Let me saw off both arms and it would get me into Ivy League. My mom would definitely be mad, Sam said. Brooke laughed. Oh, she will, won't she? I forgot. Forgot what? Chris said. Brooke laughed and managed to get out. Sam's mom's a dentist. After they laughed some more, Malcolm said, That reminds me, Chris, I don't believe you said what your parents do for a living. Chris felt a flutter of panic in his belly. He couldn't possibly tell them his mom was a cashier where people paid their electric bills and had dad fix people's cars. My mom's an electrical engineer and my dad's a mechanical engineer. Wow, 2 engineers for parents, Stan said. You must be really good at math. Chris nodded. This part, at least, was true. Okay, Mr. Little called. Time to get to work, scientists. Chris was glad he had revealed to Stan and Malcolm and Brooke what he was going to perform an experiment about following out his own tooth. He couldn't let anybody know he had figured out a way to game the system. Chris entered the cubicle and filled the petri dish with fast goo as instructed. Within a couple minutes, he could hear the grunts and groans, and the students in the other cubicles labored to pull out their teeth. In the cubicle nearest him, he heard a scream, followed by a sickening popping sound of the tooth released from its root. Chris figured it was the sake of realism, he would grunt and groan a little too. If he faked a few minutes, he very believably, he thought. Then he reached into a pocket, pulled out the ace in the hole. His right side of his mom and pulled his sister's tooth the other night. I made him remember when he was little, he declined money from the tooth fairy in order to keep his old baby teeth. He didn't know why he would be willing to let them go, especially have been a weird little kid, but now the weirdness is paying off. Chris submerged his old baby tooth into the fast goo when he touched the goo. He thought he might slight suction sensation in his fingertips. He pulled the hand away, but a tendril of pink slime connected his index finger to a petri dish with the tooth in it. The tendril was stretchy like mozzarella cheese when you lift the first slice from a hot pizza. Now there was nothing to do but wait for the tooth to get what it needed from him. They laid down on the cot, making sure to break the tendril and connected his finger to the fast goo. Chris closed his eyes and let himself doze. Soon he was dreaming about the future successes. He saw himself as though he was a character in a movie, opening the letter granting him a full scholarship in an Ivy League university. He saw himself doing research in a lab in a university. The lab was bright and clean and filled with the most cutting-edge equipment. The distinguished professor with a light lab coat stood behind him and looked over his shoulder, smiling at the good work he was doing. Chris saw himself in a black cap and gown. Walking across the stage, the university professor handed Chris a diploma, and Chris smiled at his picture taken. But then, when Chris smiled, it was immediately clear that something was wrong. Blood dripped from his lower lip and down his chin. His mouth was a black cavern framed by a bloody mess of gums. Somebody had pulled all of Chris's teeth. Chris startled awake. He was disoriented at first, waking up in a narrow cotton cubicle. When he saw a tendril strung between his finger and petri dish, and remembered where he was and why. Sitting up, Chris heard movement and whispering coming from the other cubicles. Would it be whispering come from the mouth that the experiment was supposed to create? Chris pressed his ear to the petri partition in hopes of making out what it said, but no words were discernible. From where he was, the whispering just sounded like soft whooshing in the wind through trees. But when he heard the voice of the student in the cubicle, this. Wow, she said, her voice filled with awe. Wow. There was a rattle of plastic, which would now been the biohazard bag, and then sound of footsteps. Chris pushed one of the cubicle partitions open just a crack so he could see the student leave. It was Brooke, but the look on her face was different than her usual smart, collected expression. Somehow, her features seemed softer, more open. Her eyes were wide and full of wonder. She walked up to Mr. Little and handed him a biohazard bag. Brooke rested her hand on Mr. Little's forearm and looked him in the eyes. She told me everything, Brooke said. Mr. Little smiled. Good. Nice work, Brooke. You're free to go. Brooke smiled back at Mr. Little and wandered toward the door. Chris had just about closed the small opening in the partition when he saw another student, a tall, dark-haired boy he met yet, emerged from the cubicle across the classroom. Just like Brooke, he wore an expression of amazement. He walked up to Mr. Little and handed him a biohazard bag. He told me everything, the boy said, placing his hand on Mr. Little's shoulders. Mr. Little smiled and nodded. Good. Nice work, Jacob. You're free to go. Thank you, the boy said, as though Mr. Little had given him a gift. Chris closed off a partition. Clearly, the experiment was starting to work on some people, but then he checked the progress of the petri dish. He couldn't see any significant change. It was just the same old baby tooth, submerged in a puddle of fast goo. What if my experiment doesn't work? Chris wondered. What if I fail? Ever since middle school, when his class visited the high school science fair and Chris saw amazing experiments conducted by Mr. Little's students, Chris had dreamed of being a science club. What if he didn't belong there? What if he lacked the necessary knowledge and skill? So many of the science club kids were sons and daughters of scientists themselves, or of the doctors or lawyers or college professors. Chris was the son of a clerk and a laborer. Maybe he wasn't the right stock that made the grade of the intellectual environment. Suddenly, Chris felt drained, depleted. Maybe it meant the Fazbear was draining him of his energy or needed to make the experiment work. Or maybe it was just a feeling of him giving up hope. Either way, he felt exhausted. He lay down on the cot again and fell asleep instantly. Chris woke up groggy with his face in a puddle of his own drool. His surroundings were strangely quiet, no whispering, no sounds of movement. He sat up and then wiped away the drool. The tendril of his index finger reminded him of a check of his experiment's progress. Maybe he was finally working. He instead tried to muster up some hope. The goo had outgrown the petri dish. It didn't look like a mouth of much of anything else, really. It was just a pink blob, slimy and unpleasant, about the size of a baby's fist. It was something, anyway. He just wasn't sure what around him. The room was still quiet. Had everybody else left? After a few seconds, Chris heard rustling, then footsteps, and a voice saying, "He told me everything," followed by Mrs. Little's praise and permission of the student to go. Chris sighed and sat on the cot and waited. He watched his maps in the petri dish, but if there was any progress, it was slow to see. He was akin of watching a paint dry or grass mow. "Permission to enter," a voice said from outside the petition. "Sure," Chris said. Mr. Little stepped in a cubicle. "How's it going, Chris?" "I'm not sure, to be honest. Am I the last person left?" Mr. Little smiled. "No, there's a few other stragglers. I'm just making rounds and checking up on everybody's progress." He nodded in the direction of Mabel. "May I?" "Of course." Chris felt nervous as Mr. Little took out of nowhere a finished project. Mr. Little approached the table and looked at Blob, cocking his head in a way that reminded Chris of a family dog. Mr. Little said, leaning down and squinting at the petri dish. "Very curious. Did I do something wrong?" Chris asked. He knew there was to be gone, even though he wouldn't admit to Mr. Little. She should have followed directions and pulled out one of his own teeth at the spot like the rest of the students did. He had taken the way out, but he was a coward. Now he is reaping the consequences. "As experiments go, this one's pretty impossible to mess up," Mr. Lowe said, rubbing his chin. "You did put one of your teeth in there, didn't you?" "Yes, sir," Chris said, not elaborating on the age or origin of the tooth. "Well, sometimes in science, we just have to admit that we don't know why things are happening and what they are. The way I see it, Chris, you've got two choices. You can end the experiment and say just didn't turn out for whatever reason, dispose of whatever that thing is you got there, and go home and play video games or whatever it is you do in your own time." He smiled. "Or you can acknowledge that something interesting is happening here, even if we don't quite know what it is, and give it some more time to see what happens." Chris didn't have to ask himself which choices real scientists would make. "I'd like to give it some more time if that's okay." Mr. Little smiled and clapped on his back. "It's more than okay. I admire your patience. It's an excellent quality the scientists have. Most scientific endeavors worth nothing doing require a great deal of patience and determination." He looked back at the Blob. "And be honest, I'm glad you made a choice, because I'm pretty curious how to see this turns out myself." He gave Chris a little two-finger salute. "I'll check back later, okay?" "Okay, thank you, sir." Chris felt relieved. He had made the right choice, and he received Mr. Little's approval. Maybe it would be a real science club member after all. He had down to wait because he was a scientist did. After a while, there was more movement and rustling around, the familiar sounds uttering different voices. "He told me everything. She told me everything. He told me everything." Each time, there was Mr. Little's approval for the student to leave. Then, there was silence. Finally, feeling like the last person on earth, Chris called, "Mr. Little?" "Yes, Chris." "Am I the only one left?" "Yes, you are." His tone was pleasant. "No worries, though. I should give up so you can go home." Chris wondered if Mr. Little had a wife or some Little was waiting on him. Wondered why the lock-in was taking so long. Mr. Little poked his head inside the cubicle. "Of course not. I've got no place else to be. And if you're willing to wait, so am I." He grinned, and he gave a thumbs up. "Patience and determination." Once Mr. Little disappeared from view, Chris felt another wave of exhaustion. Hoping that the energy draining from him would be funneled into a little pink blob, he laid back down in the cot and lost consciousness immediately. When he awoke, he gasped at the side of the table. The mass was now quintupled in size, and was now far too large to fit into a biohazard bag. He was still slimy and pink, but no longer the insert blob. Shaped somewhat like a limbless human torso, it was now pulsing with life. Chris felt excited but a little fearful as he approached the creation. The way it expanded and contracted made him feel something might jump out of the creature as he saw the horror movie once. He stood over the pulsing mass. Its skin, what you should call it that, was translucent pink, like a bubble blown from a bubble gum. Beneath it was the source of the pulsing, a cluster of bag-like structures and beating into a rhythm. He seemed strangely familiar, though Chris didn't know why. Chris looked at the tendril, now thicker and stronger, and connected them to a nearly formed organism on the table. The tendril pulsed in unison with the strange thing's organs. Chris gasped and realized why the pattern pulsing seemed so familiar. The thing's organs and the tendril that connected him were throbbing at the beat of Chris's own heartbeat. A shudder ran through him, and he was overcome with a sudden need to empty his bladder. Now, how he had done that, he realized he had gone to the bathroom for hours. Not since right after school dismissal rang. His knowledge increased his sense of urgency. But now, he would manage to go down the hall of boys' restrooms when he physically connected his weird, seemingly living thing. He wondered how the other kids managed it. He probably kind of needed to go in the first place because they had completed the experiment just so much quickly than he had. Plus, the experiment hadn't yielded something so large and unwieldy. Just as Chris decided desperate enough to call for Mr. Little and make a pathetic confession that he needed to go to the restroom and he didn't know how the pressure of the bladder disappeared, he looked over the thing on the table, which expelled a large amount of fluid that hit the floor with a splash. Was that his pee? And what was it doing over there? Chris knew he wouldn't have been embarrassed. He was pretty sure he had just peed to the floor of a science classroom, after all, and a big no-no if there ever was one. But mostly he was confused. Wasn't his pee supposed to come out of his own body? He looked like a tendril, now thicker and stronger, with a tube connecting his body to the thing. feeding it like an umbilical cord that connects a mother to her unborn baby. Maybe his pee was traveled for him to the tube and expelled the thing on the table, but why? He watched the thing pulse some more. Whatever it was, he didn't like it. He didn't like being connected to it. He was like acknowledging letting it leach energy and grow bigger and stronger while he grew more exhausted and weak. It was time to cut the cord. The problem was, he didn't have anything to cut it with. He looked around an almost empty cubicle and spotted unused pliers. They weren't as good as a knife, or as strong as a pair of scissors, but they were still better than anything a severed cord with his bare hands. But he used the pliers to grip and squeeze the cord, and then gave a hard yank to tear it apart and break the connection. He poised the pliers and grabbed the tendril just above where it connected and left index finger. Then he squeezed. It felt like somebody was choking the life out of him. Pinching the tube cut off air supply somehow, and he fell to the floor gasping, landing on the puddle of what was certainly his own urine. He released the tendril from the pliers, and his breath started to come back. He was too lightheaded and got up quickly. Then he lay on the wet floor a few minutes, panting over like an overheated dog. There was no way he was ended connection between him and disturbing result of the experiment, or were the connection bound together like conjoined twins who shared a vital organ. He pulled himself up and willed himself to look at the massive puddle. His torso had lengthened, and the small pink buds were visible in the arms and legs with him now. Somehow he hadn't been able watching a neck and a head had formed. The head was hairless, featureless, and horrifying. Chris backed away slowly, bumped into his cot. He didn't want to look at anything anymore. He couldn't look away either. It radiated a horrible fascination, like a gory accident on the side of a highway. He sat on the cot and looked at it until he realized his vision had become blurry and distanced. It was strange. He had never been trouble with his eyes before. He had a hand over his right eye, and suddenly it was like the world had plunged into blackness. He reached up and put his hand over his left eye, and what he found there made him cry in terror. His left eye was gone. It was impossible, of course. The loss of red blood cells and level anxiety made him corrupted and precipitations, making him paranoid, maybe even making him hallucinate. He lifted up his left eye again, but he felt only a gaping empty socket. Impossible, he told himself. He looked at the tendril. Inside of the translucent tube, an orb traveled away from Chris and toward the evolving pink form of the table. The orb was being pushed along by the tendril's pulsations. It was the size of the shape of a human eyeball. What the? Chris' hand shot up to where eyeball used to be, and a popping sound, and a cork being pulled from a bottle. And then Chris looked over the thing on the table, looked back at him and Chris' left eye. The face no longer featureless. It was now cycloptic. So Chris knew the creature wouldn't have content to stay of a cyclops for long. He was going for the other eye, and more parts of him as well. Even without the benefits of having both eyes, Chris could see things clearly now. The organs that throbbed beneath the creature's translucent skin was his organs, or they used to be. They had been used as a living organ donor for his thing, but he wouldn't be a living donor for much longer. With his vital organs being siphoned through the tube one by one, he wouldn't have much time left. Chris pulled the tendril, trying to rip it away from the body, but he connected it solidly, as his fingers were his hands. Gripping the tube constricted and made him lose his breath. He tried to get up with his vague, hopeless thought of running where he could get help. Even if it meant dragging the thing behind him in a broken kite on the string. But he found himself too weak to stand. But he still had his voice, didn't he? Where he was nothing but to do the string. Help, he yelled. His voice was thinner and weaker than he could like to be. Help, Mr. Little, anybody, I'm over here, help me. His cries for help was silence. Now all the other students had gone home. Mr. Little gone home too? Would he have left out without saying goodbye, without having Chris' permission to leave as well? Chris could not remember having felt so utterly alone. The yelling had tired him out. Everything tired him out. His muscles felt non-existent. His arms and legs were out of floppy, overcooked noodles. He sank down into the cot. He needed to think about a plan, a way to escape. But weakness and fatigue overtook him. He didn't mean to fall asleep. He wasn't strong enough to fight. A wave of exhaustion slept over him. When he awoke, he opened his one eye and saw one thing sitting on the edge of the table across from him. Except the thing it wasn't a thing anymore. It was a boy. A boy who, except for a strangely pink skin tone, looked exactly like Chris. It was Chris' height and build, with the sandy brown hair and wearing Chris's clothes and looking at Chris like he had been the one with his left eye. Did that mean Chris was naked? He looked down at the reclining body and saw that he didn't have enough structural integrity to support clothes. Chris's body was devoid of muscle and bone. He was mass, a blob. He had no idea how he'd be still alive, how he would be aware of little of him left. There was no way he would hold out much longer. Chris understood he would never see his mom and dad and Emma again. He would never take another bike ride to the dairy bar on lake with Josh and Kyle. Maybe somebody else would have taken a pork chop for his walks and feed him his dinner. Thing got down from the table and used Chris's bones and muscles to walk over to the cot. With his one remaining eye, Chris saw a creation. He saw the creature look at him like nobody else would ever know the difference. It would go to Chris's house and take his place in Chris's family. It would sit at the dinner table with his mom and dad and Emma, eating hot dogs and macaroni and cheese. It would play pork chop. It would study the cool beans, coffee, and go to school with science club meetings. Chris saw his own life, was going to go on without him. Chris struggled to speak. His mouth were more as parched as dessert, and pretty sure his lips were gone. It was hard to make himself heard. Listen, his voice finally came out as croak. My mom and dad, they're going to love you because they love me. Be nice to them. He stopped to try and catch his breath. Breathing used to be so easy when you never thought about it. Be nice to my sister, too. She's a good kid. Girl Scout. She's your sister now. The words were hard to get out, and they needed to say, Miss Thomas, our neighbor. She's old. She's a nice lady. Help her when you can, and play with Pork Chop. The creature averted his brow and looked confused. I am to play with a pork chop? Chris felt his laugh strengthening. He whispered, Pork Chop is my dog. Yours, now. Chris felt a tendril connected him to life disintegrating. Take care of him, he said. And his words came out softly. He was afraid he could hear them. Chris felt a strange sensation of suction where his right eye was, and then everything went black. He listened to his eyeball was sucked through the tube, and more slurping sounds too, and the other parts of him were drained up in the tendril. Parts he knew he wouldn't live about. And it was like the creature was drinking him, sucking out his last organs through a long straw, like the dregs of a milkshake, leaving only an empty vessel. Chris, as the creature would have learned to call itself, stood over a shapeless mass of empty flesh in the cot. He opened the biohazard bag and stuffed the fleshy remains of the experiment inside of it. He was surprised when he was able to cram all of it into one bag, and then he picked it all up. Contents surprisingly light. He left the cubicle and found Mr. Little sitting at the desk, drinking from a styrofoam cup of coffee and munching on a donut. Well, good morning, Chris, Mr. Little said, standing up and brushing crumbs from his mustache. You had a long night, didn't you? But you don't keep me in suspense. Did you finally complete the experiment? Did you get the results you wanted? The new Chris's eyes were wide and full of wonder. Soon he would be stepping out of the classroom and out of the school and would world for the first time. Chris handed the biohazard bag to Mr. Little. He looked into the teacher's eyes and said, He told me everything, he said. As Chris walked out the school building, the sun was warm on his face. The sky was blue, the clouds were white and fluffy. The birds had chirped in the trees. Chris smiled. It was a beautiful day.